Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Pass the Barb. Today is Monday, January 22nd, and we got a full crew here for the most part. Hunter's probably drowning his sorrows from the Packers loss, so that's what we'll chop that up to. But anyways, I am your host, Adam Bartusek. I'm joined by my homie, Ryan Pinkalla.
What's up? Glad to be back. Glad to be with the full squad tonight. I know Hunter can't make it, but it's going to be all good. We're holding down the fort. We got everybody here, and I think we got a really good show coming up tonight. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, for sure. We got Stolski, Bill. What you're Stolski now. You're not Wild Bill.
Things are changing. Things are changing.
Guy gets a mustache and he changes his name on the podcast.
He does look a little cleaned up, per se. I will say. I think he had a date or something because he looks fresh.
The chick with the chaps came back to the feed store, didn't she?
So I have to,
that's a hell of a callback.
that's pretty good. That girl was unbelievable. I hope to see her again someday. I changed my name. I changed my face and my facial hair because the fishing is so bad. So I have to change things, and we need something to change here. So.
Yeah. Hey, what's going on with? I got Snapchats from you like over the weekend. Is it just like wicked bad weather, or what are you like battling right now out there?
Yeah, the weather is bad. The fishing is not so good. It's just it hasn't been super fun.
And where
Idaho
are you in
isn't
Idaho?
all it's chopped up to be.
No. I'm in Lewiston, Idaho, on the Clearwater River, fishing for steelhead. But it hasn't been red hot, but we're warming up here, so hopefully that will get the fish moving. Maybe the river will bump a little bit. It's so low right now, so terrifying to run, so skinny. I think I'm gonna blow up my boat every day out there, but that's okay. Sobi, what have you been up to?
Oh man, ice fishing in the El Nino winter. But I want to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you that are swinging in to listen. It's because of you guys you've made Pass the Barb the #1 outdoor podcast in the world, and it's because of you guys that we pay top dollar to big time guests. We get them on here, like we said, we pay them top dollar. Like here's our whole budget, and we just splurged it tonight.
It would actually be shocking if we just.
Our budget is so big. It's really staggering the numbers we're working with. There's a lot of commas.
Yeah. Digits on digits. But no,
so many.
It's going to be an amazing episode. So sit down, strap in, grab some popcorn, and
there's a lot of commas. So what's everybody been up to? Let's check in quick. So Sobi, ice fishing. Adam?
Yeah, we'll check in. So the one thing, this might be a little offhand, Sobi, but I think I brought this up to you first. We're going to do this first because we'll probably chat about this later on in the podcast too. But obviously the listeners know you put up your one video on your YouTube, but do you just want to make any generic statement about your one video?
No, not right now. No.
Okay, not. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, we can bring it up later.
With our guest.
If I had to make a generic statement just kind of about the winter in general, this weekend was the first time we could really get around the metro and ice fish. And it was like the first time my better half went out, and she usually ice fishes, all winter really hard.
Well, Steph finally made it out?
Yeah, Steph finally made it out. And then I just looked at the calendar and went, some of the first Bass Pro Tour tournaments, and the Classic is like a month away. So we just fished first ice in the metro, and the Bassmaster Classic is within 30 days. So it's just
I think I saw someone's driving to the first Open in like a week. I think practice starts for the first Open in a week.
Yeah.
Jeez.
That's
crazy.
Staggering.
But yes, you're right, dude. Ice is here, and dude, people are going hard right now. Everywhere I went the past 2 weekends, I was mind blown how many people were out, even in places where they shouldn't be. Everyone was just frothing to get out there.
I'm so proud of everybody in this state for having so much belief in ice to drive vehicles after 1 week of open water.
Well, there's that too.
10 days.
It's incredible.
Yeah. I think on Saturday, me and Steph were walking off, and it's really cold on this day, and we're just trudging the sled. And right as we're getting close to the axis, this dude just flies by us in a 1-ton, 22-foot ice castle dual axle. And we were walking back, and I was like, are we dumb? Or is he dumb? Or is it somewhere?
Did he go through?
No, he just ripped right across the middle of the lake. And I was
I think then you're dumb.
I know.
It's science.
It's science.
I mean, dude, the ice is good. It's definitely it's freaking concrete, man. Drilling holes is kind of actually it's good. Have a good auger, but like it's really hard. It froze fast, but yeah, we've been spending a bunch of time out on the ice. Fishing's been pretty fun on our end. I mean, it's been nice to get out. That's, I think, the biggest thing. The cold has kind of put a damper on that, but today me and Logan went out and went on a little recon mission to some lakes, and
Did you catch?
we caught some. Not a lot of 7-inch bluegills. Logan caught a giant largemouth though.
Yeah, did you guys weigh that thing? The pictures
I didn't have a
awesome.
scale with. I'm very sure it was about 5 pounds. It was only like 18 or 19 inches. It was just square.
Yeah,
It was huge. It was
Picture's
so
great.
round.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a lot of bass in there?
Well, we caught like 12 of them today, so evidently there
Jeez.
is. But yeah, a lot. They were either 1 pound or over 4. So I don't think there's much of a middle class. But yeah, and today was the first day it was like 30 degrees and no wind, and it was amazing. It was so nice. And looking at the forecast, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to enjoy this for a while. So pretty pumped ice is here. And yeah, Stolski, you got anything special other than just battling out in Idaho?
Well, I do, boys. And this has been in the works for about the better part of 6 months, but in 3-ish weeks time, I am going to Argentina.
Oh,
wow. Are you going on one of our bucket list trips we talked about?
He's doing it.
Perhaps I'm going to be there for about 2
Is
months.
the bucket list trip, dude?
So you're doing guiding down there?
Yeah, I'll be working. Yep. And so I have partnered with Argentine friend of mine who I guided with in Alaska this summer. His name is Joaquin Capel. Great guy. Awesome. Joaquin, mi amigo. But he has a pretty big, essentially a booking agency with all kinds of stuff down there, fishing, big game hunting, wing shooting. He grew up there, so he's a pretty well-connected guy. But yeah, I'm going to go down there for about 2 months time. And we're going to fish and we're going to hunt, and it's going to be pretty cool. I do have a favor to ask of the Past Barb listeners. This guy, I mean, he never had any kind of really like social media footprint. It's all been word of mouth. So we now have an Instagram page, so I could use a few followers on there. Argentina Outdoor Adventures is
follow Joaquin.
The account, Argentina _outdoor_adventures,
Follow it
kind of
up.
a long one. But I'm ecstatic. This has been somewhere I've wanted to go forever. I mean, it is like, a sportsman's paradise in terms of trout fishing, golden dorado, king salmon, and then the hunting too. You have all kinds of wing shooting, doves, pigeons, ducks, and then really excited. He has a awesome red stag program down there. And that's where the majority of my time will be at that ranch doing stag hunts. So it's going to be pretty cool. I'm really excited about it. So
are the red stag invasive there, or have they always been there? That's going to be
a sweet.
They're not. So they're free range red stag down there. So they've been there. They are not like New Zealand where, they're, and the New Zealand stag probably are a little bit bigger, but a lot of that is kind of high fence hunting. So this is all free range Patagonia stag hunting. So very similar to like hunting elk in, Montana or Colorado or something like that. So.
Wow.
That's
going to be a hell of an experience.
I'm very jealous.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. So Idaho for about 3 more weeks, and then we are heading south. So, and it'll be summertime. We'll be summer coming into fall. It's going to be just fantastic.
That was going to be my next question. Like laying in bed
Unreal.
in Idaho when it's brutal cold. Like, have you just looked up the weather and just had dirty thoughts?
Well, I've done that, and then I dropped my hinge location in Argentina, and let me tell you, it is out of bounds down
What
there.
if you fall in love and never?
I'm sort of hoping that's what happens. I mean, it is incredible. I mean, the scenery is, So
just a boy from northern Minnesota.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm so excited.
I'm clamoring with excitement. I'm so excited about it. So, but yeah, his big thing is, basically helping people navigate, how to book a trip, hunting or fishing trip in Argentina. So I'm going to get the lowdown, and hopefully this is something that'll go on for a while. So pretty excited about it. So
Well, do you
That'll
know,
be
will
sweet.
you have service down there? Is it possible to do a podcast from Argentina and just
I think I
report?
will, depending on where I'm at. They have Wi-Fi and that kind of thing, so I think I'll be able to check in. Apparently my cell phone is going to work down there according to AT&T, so I think I should have decent
Look
service.
at that.
So
AT&T stepping it up.
yeah. So
Coming through for Pass the
awesome.
Barb, you know?
I think service will be. I think I'll have it. I guess we'll see. So,
That's awesome.
but yeah, we're heading south.
We'll give her a dangle.
It's time to get international.
Heck yeah, dude.
Hold on, I want to pause for a second.
That's
Does Pinkalla's voice look a little delayed?
Yeah, no, Pink is wicked delayed. Pink, you should leave and come back.
Pop on out real quick.
I'll go out and come back in. You guys can just roll. Yeah.
Yeah, solid 4 or 5 seconds there. Okay, so what we will do now for the people who I'm sure are here to listen to, we're going to bring in a guest who is kind of a friend of ours and known Aaron for a fair amount of time. I know Sobi is as well, but we've got Aaron from Uncut Angling. How are you?
Great. Glad to be here. Hello, everybody.
I feel like it should be more dynamic than that. I feel
No,
like
Sobi can do it. Here, Sobi, you do it.
Let's
Show.
start over. This is Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Hi, I'm Phoenix. I'm Aaron. I'm pumped to be here.
I wasn't saying that on your end, Aaron. I was saying
He was saying that for me. I'm very monotone, non-dramatic.
A little drum roll, please, ladies and gentlemen. A media icon in the fishing world, potentially the OG GOAT of YouTube fishing, with a show who he is the host, part entertainment, part education, with some ridiculous. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Wiebe of Uncut Angling. Just a quick round of applause.
Give it up.
There he is.
Yeah, that was
There he is.
Wow.
Boom.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. And like we said before, this isn't free. We paid him fat stacks so he could be here. So thank you for taking the budget and being on here tonight.
Before you said that part, and you're like the world's #1 outdoor podcast, and I'm thinking on some metric that's probably true. I don't know what the metric is, but
He bought
We'll
it.
create
He
a
bought it.
scale.
It's true on my metric, Aaron.
Oh, but seriously, thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you. We're excited for this podcast, and we're going to cover a lot of stuff, and it's going to be very loose-ended. I don't know what other podcasts you've been on besides potentially the one other one, but this is just a very loose format podcast. Feel free to tangent off in any other direction you want to go, whether it's Phoenix's diet or what you're drinking in the mug that says I'm kind of a big deal, or whether it's Barotrauma or anything else underneath the sun. So indulge. Yes.
Love
when
that.
I was on the Sporting Journal Radio podcast, I was actually using this mug, but I was kind of like drinking it sideways like this because I was like, this is a little much.
No, you're good here. Perfect for our audience. But I'll just lead it off with the thing I was most curious of, kind of just, I guess, with your new resurgence into YouTube, right, Aaron? I know you're very creative, extremely intelligent as well. But with your videos, you always leave like little Easter eggs and stuff in there. And I want to know, with your newest stuff, what is up with the sleeping giant intro? I've loved it. Like, I saw that and I was just like, oh, this is awesome.
Who is waking him up?
Yeah,
Who
who's
is the
waking him
giant?
up?
And who
Who's
is
the
previously
giant?
sleeping?
Is it Phoenix? Yeah.
Okay, a few things I want to comment on that is when you said my new resurgence. Before I uploaded the hammering 16-inch crappie video, I hadn't uploaded on YouTube for 11 or 12 months. So there's been like lots of times over the last 10, 12 years since I started doing this where I haven't uploaded for 6 to 12 months. So I always feel like I actually haven't changed. Everybody else is doing whatever they're doing, and I'm the one that hasn't changed. I take breaks when I want to take breaks, whether it's a creative break or doing other stuff in life or whatever. But the fact that I don't release a video for a year and then release one, to everyone else that seems staggering because a lot of people are on a much more regular upload schedule. But I am always just kind of doing whatever I'm doing. I'm not thinking that I'm potentially retired, potentially taking a big hiatus. To me, it doesn't feel like a long time. Besides all the reminders, it's been a long time. It never feels like a long time for me between uploads.
Yeah.
So then what was the inspiration behind the themed waking of a sleeping giant?
So the sleeping giant thing, actually, it's like something I've reused a bunch of times now. Cause like a few years ago, I dropped that, and it was in relation to an Arctic char fishery here in Manitoba that was stocked like 10 or 15 years ago, but the stocking was not listed by the government. And then I caught wind of this lake and started trying to get permission to access it because it crossed some indigenous lands. So I was trying to get in there to fish this because nobody knew about it. Nobody was fishing there, and it had like large adult Arctic char. So I leaked at the end of a video. It was that goofy one about the perch stripes. I leaked that I'm going to go wake up the sleeping giant, and people were trying to guess what it was. And I could never get permission to fish this lake, but I had kind of generated that idea either in my own head or in other people's heads or whatever. So then last summer, I started working on some political stuff, fighting a new lagoon that was being built really close to my house on the creek that flows right by my house. And I started to use that sleeping giant theme again. And I hired out the logo that you guys saw at the start of these last couple of videos. I hired out to get made last summer in preparation for this lagoon documentary that's still in the works. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen with that because there's a lot of political angles to it that I have to kind of be careful of with timing and stuff. But so that's where the sleeping giant was going to be the lagoon. And the sleeping giant, the same way the same way people were initially trying to guess what's the fishery, what's the angle of the sleeping giant. And now you guys are saying, well, what's actually sleeping in terms of what the sleeping giant is? With the lagoon, it was the same thing in the sense of like the lagoon could be the sleeping giant. I could be the sleeping giant. My neighbor Shane, who you guys might have noticed in the last video.
Yeah,
he's like,
I wanted to know who Shane was, so thank you for answering.
He easily could be a sleeping giant in a lot of ways too. Like there's just so many different things that could be a sleeping giant, and it's very interpretive, and that's kind of cool. And then the way it came up with this Barotrauma video is that could be all these fish handling topics and stuff, and people are saying it's me, but I'm not saying it's me because I just told you guys I don't really consider 12 months between uploads to be a long time. So if anything, I was more equating it to the fish handling topic and just kind of, poking at some underlying topics in the fishing industry that aren't necessarily mentioned. And there's definitely a lot more of them with fish handling and fish stuff that, we'll keep talking about and keep diving into, I think.
I like that. So you're using this sleeping giant like idea or term as like a kind of just a launching point for these bigger ideas that you're trying to kind of talk about is essentially what you're using it as.
And that it's interpretive, and people can use it for whatever they want. Like maybe it means something to them. Maybe it triggers something for what they're working on or doing or feeling about stuff, and they can ride that momentum themselves if they want.
Yeah,
I like that.
I like that a lot. It was very good. I saw it and I was like, this is sweet. I was a big fan.
Cool.
Sobi, you got anything you want to roll into right away?
Yeah, I guess before we jump into anything, let's jump into small things as far as like, what is the most recent thing you've been doing besides these videos outside of fishing? Or has it you've just been diving into this? Have you gone on any different trips? Have you done any hunting? Have you done any hobbies? I feel like you're always wielding a gun somewhere. Do you grouse hunt?
I always like have the mindset and say to people that I'm always hunting. And I think you guys can probably relate with that because whether you're hunting for where there's safe ice, where there's no ice, where there's a new crappie bite, where there's grouse running around, I always have that mindset. And I think that's such a good thing for us outdoorsmen to have is we just like, we get up out of bed and there's just purpose immediately. We get in the vehicle, there's purpose. There's always that purpose driving us. And I feel bad for people who aren't into outdoor pursuits because they do not have that the same way whatsoever. Yeah. And it's like, I am always hunting 6 different things simultaneously, not literally a walking bird, but I mean a chicken when I say it, 'cause I'm picturing a chicken crossing the road, but not literally something in for a game, but I'm always hunting a bunch of different things. And to answer your question, small things going on, man, I don't know what to say about that. I don't know.
Well, when you say the hunting thing, what it makes me think of, we've talked about this a few times before, but kind of in relation to your videos you've been coming out with, the topic of forward-facing sonar. I feel like now more than ever, like I know the way we fish now, like it's a lot more like hunting. Like I'm not necessarily going out and being like, okay, I'm going to chill here and fish. It's like I'm going to go find fish that want to bite. And it's like actively being able to do that because of the way technology is now and using that to your advantage. So yeah, I can very much feel that where like today, I was out on a lake. I drove around on a snowmobile all day, just drilling a hole and turning live around to see where fish were and how they were moving and the whole deal.
Yep.
What's your next small question, Sobi? You don't have it? Yeah, I figured you had something clever. You don't have anything clever?
No, we always have plenty of clever things.
You asked like my worst nightmare question, like the question like where you run into a neighbor or something, and they're like, "So what's been going on?" And you're just like,
I feel like you could have answered that by just saying like what the weather is like or anything in between, or what you fed your cat this morning, or it just something. I know there's so much depth to you outside of fishing, and I just wanted to just break that surface a little bit just to see like. Let's get a little inside scoop of what Aaron also loves besides, fish and fishing culture in general.
He got in a quick 18 the other day, I'm sure.
And maybe a good question would be, who do you think's going the distance in the NBA playoffs?
Okay, I'd rather talk, about football or basketball for sure. But it's funny because you're saying, well, it would have been such an ezy question. Meanwhile, did you see me? I tried. I was like,
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I should have said football because obviously there's lots going on with football. One of my favorite people to follow, Taylor Swift, her boyfriend's doing really well. So, is bringing me along board for that.
Do you think they'll go to the Super Bowl?
Big time Swiftie?
I would have to lean Chiefs, I guess, just based on is it 4 years in a row they've been in the Super Bowl?
I think Mahomes has been in 6 AFC championships now in a row.
I feel like that would be a question you would know if you were a Chiefs fan before
like
Taylor got on the scene. So I'm getting the vibe that you're a Chiefs fan now.
It's a very bandwagon situation.
Yeah. That seems like you're there for the Chiefs now because she's there. And if that's true, that's fine.
Yeah. And Aaron, how much do you love the Minnesota Timberwolves right now? That's what I want to know. Like, we're finally good at basketball. You're not a Wolves fan, really?
Yeah,
it appears he disagrees.
Yeah,
I should be because it's like when we didn't have an NHL team, it was like we got to cheer for the Wild because they're the closest thing we've got, kind of thing. And as much as we're in different countries, I think there is like a brethren between Manitoba and Minnesota that's shared. Like for you guys, you're probably feeling like it's competition between the Dakotas and you and Wisconsin and you, but you probably feel more of an allegiance north towards Manitoba in ways.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
So it should be the Timberwolves, but I am like major bandwagon sports fan, and not so much because of Taylor Swift, but more like I started cheering for LeBron, as Sam knows, just because he's like the guy to cheer for. And before I was cheering for the Chiefs, I was cheering for Tom Brady. Like I'm just like the most just sure thing bandwagon. I want to be along for the good times, and if the times aren't good, I'm jumping on to whoever else is worth cheering for sure.
I like that you just admit that. Like other people don't. You're just like, dude, I want to win, so I'm going to cheer for winners.
He's a big Lions fan now.
It's devastating cheering for a team that's losing. Like that's just devastating. So
that's been my whole life. Literally, I'm a Minnesota sports fan. I haven't seen a championship in my life.
Yeah, you were chirping me the other night during that Packer game, but I was like, at least I'm watching my team at the end of January.
Yeah, and I was like, that's fair. Like, whatever. I know where I'm at.
Wait, are you watching them? I thought that you're not really watching them anymore.
Well, he's a Packer fan, so
yeah.
And they played on Saturday and they did not win.
I know. That's why you were watching them. You're not really watching them anymore.
Yeah.
Dude.
Thank you, Aaron.
Watching the way the sports media flips on that stuff is just remarkable. Like, do you follow Packers really closely, Ryan?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah. Like you're talking about how it turned around for like when they started being successful.
Yeah, and how
like 6 weeks ago, Jordan Love was gone.
Yes, we already know Jordan Love is not the guy. Like they're literally all saying he's not the guy, and then now he's for sure the guy, and it's so amazing. It's like, okay, wait, how did that
20
change?
more years?
Everyone's on board. Everyone's on board. The town of Green Bay has adopted this man. It's beautiful.
I just really, really hope, and I know this won't happen because Wisconsin sports, like the Packers in general, they've been so fortunate with their draft picks of quarterbacks for so long now. But I would really like an implosion like the Eagles had this year with the Packers next year, where like they come out and go like 10-1 to start and then lose 7 in a row, coach everyone's up in arms. The coach needs to be fired. That would make me really happy.
Just stub all 10 toes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
just a rich
basically that.
history of just, wow, figuring it out, you know?
Yeah.
Hey,
Exactly.
whether Jordan Love works out or not, it's still a mistake in my mind that when you have Aaron Rodgers at the peak of his career, you use up a draft pick that's going to pay off in 3 or 4 years. That just doesn't make sense to me. Like the Packers were doing so well. How do you not implement another key piece and go all in to win then? Like, how do you justify that? Even if it works out,
I don't know.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know that it was a justifiable decision. I think it was just made. And they just dealt with the consequences of that, and here we are now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Well, okay, we've had our little sports talk. I think now we can start diving into a little bit of fishing talk. I guess obviously, Aaron, we wanted to have you on, and we had talked to you actually originally like a few weeks ago when your Barotrauma video first came out, and we kind of were like, well, let's wait a little longer till you have some more stuff out. But I guess the first thing I would want to know is, so when you were getting into doing these videos, what sparked, I guess, this creative piece? Like, had you been planning on doing these for a while, or was this something that came up because of studies or, stuff you had seen online, or kind of how did you end up going down this track?
There's definitely like some barotrauma studies that have been going on in Manitoba that I was already like very keen on these topics and preparing, not anything in particular, but just preparing like, dude, I've got stacks of studies all around me always. Like I'm always looking through stuff. And when I got into the political stuff last year, it was like over not fishing related matters. But when I can get interested in not fishing related matters, then when it's fishing related, it's like so much easier to just like dive in and get super interested in that stuff. So basically they did some barotrauma studies in Manitoba over the course of the last year or two. And I dove into those and found a bunch of things I was kind of uncomfortable with and was like kind of gearing up to do a response to, and was just like waiting to get some more questions answered and stuff. And then saw the other video, the Angling Buzz video, and it was like, okay, well, this is just too easy and blatant. And the biggest thing about it is that nobody had replied to it. That's what got me, is that there was nobody questioning it or saying anything negative about it. And even if there had been a little bit of a balanced response, I probably wouldn't have talked about it at all, because then it's like, okay, there's already some discussion. But it just shocked me that there wasn't a single comment I saw anywhere where people were challenging it or giving it a second thought. And I know from my own what's the word? I always forget the word when it's your own personal accounts. Anecdotal.
Yeah.
From my own anecdotal stuff over the years, I knew that there's just no way that the rate could be, anywhere close to what was kind of depicted in the video, the mortality rate. So then when I'm watching the video, I'm not watching it totally neutral. I'm watching it looking to see, like, where did these fish have the issue, because I already know that there's no way it can be that high. So, that kind of gave me a pretty big advantage to sort of pick out some things that likely were drivers of those fish having an issue, and, noticing the issues with the net and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of plugged into these type of things and topics. So it wasn't like I just saw the video and was like, okay, here we go, I got to make a response to this video. It was because I was in tune with the topics already before that, for sure.
So let me ask you quick. So what initially sparked your, I don't know, interest or just like information gathering about barotrauma as a topic? Like, it sounds like that happened well before this Angling Buzz thing, well before you ever made this video. And it's, I mean, I don't know, is the studies that have been occurring in Manitoba been something that you've been involved with, or they were something you just became interested in because this information was coming out, or how did that kind of unfold?
And were they really generalized studies, or were they based more on ice fishing and crappies or anything specific like that? Like, what were the baseline studies that Manitoba was doing that at least piqued your interest?
They were lake trout studies, and they actually were the errors and flaws that what I consider to be errors and flaws in the Manitoba lake trout stuff is very similar to the Angling Buzz observations, where they basically are, without sounding too accusatory here, they're basically mishandling the sample, and that's skewing the results. So before they can even get to the results, they've already kind of mishandled the fish. that kind of summarizes, that part of the question. But in terms of like a peaked interest in barotrauma topics, I've basically been pretty aware of all these topics for kind of forever, like in the sense of like back before I was an adult. I got to add that in there. Before I was an adult, being involved in some questionable fish transfer type situations. When you transfer fish, you get a chance to see them over a prolonged period of time, and you put smallmouth or crappie or something in your live well, and they're upside down, and then you transfer them. And if you're putting them in an aquarium or a farm dugout or whatever, you get a chance to see them over time and have a invested interest in their survival and how to keep them alive, essentially. So many, many years ago, transferring crappies from a deep basin on Lake of the Woods, for example, and the fish are, definitely experiencing barotrauma, and there's no way they're going to swim away. And just for whatever reason, sinking them in a cage in my parents' pond, like we're talking 20 years ago, sinking them in a cage in my parents' pond for like a day or two, and then pulling the cage up a couple days later and looking at the fish. And it's like, okay, now you're 100%, and just open the cage and let them go. And it's like, if barotrauma had wiped those fish out the way popular belief is, there's no way I could have had a success rate on that whole situation, because, you're talking about a 2-hour car ride and a transfer through live wells and just like so many stressors on those fish that on top of the barotrauma itself, you would just have no chance of having those fish have any survival rate moving forward.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what, I guess, tangent question to what you just said. So obviously this was a long time ago, but what drove you to the conclusion that you thought that was a successful potentially way to like revive these fish?
Well,
I'm just trying to get like the thought process of like, obviously there was like some interest here. Like you had a fairly good understanding of like what barotrauma is, what the potential like effects are on the fish. So
I'm not sure exactly what the angle of your question is, but I think I can answer it anyways. Is like, if you're only transferring like 1 or 2 limits, depending on how many people you have, and the next year you're noticing that there's quite a few crappies in the pond, like, that kind of gives you an idea that most of them lived. I don't know if that was exactly what your question was.
Just like you were saying, you took this cage and like sank it in the pond. You had success with revival of some of the fish that you transferred based on doing that. Yeah. Was that something it just happened to work out, or was that something you were like, oh, I'm going to do this because I think this will be successful?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about literally 20 years ago when I'm not an adult. I can't emphasize that enough. Is that you have this fish that's floating. You understand roughly why it's floating and why it can't return to death, because it's got air in it. I don't know exactly how much I knew then, but I knew it has air in it, right? And that the air isn't coming from somewhere extraneous. It's not like that air is coming out of its bloodstream or something. It's like the inflated swim bladder deal. So the idea there was just on the fly thinking, well, at least if I sink them in a cage, they have a chance, because they certainly don't want to be up here. And I at that point, like we're talking about 20 years ago, I wouldn't have known that I was going to pull up the cage in a couple days and they were all going to be fine. But when I pull up the cage in a couple days and it's like, oh, everybody's fine, freaking rights. It's like, you kind of figure it out on the spot. There's not really a manual for stuff like I'm describing, obviously.
Yeah. So, and that's what I was getting at. Like, it was just something you tried, it worked out, and like, wow, now you got that in your mind. Like, hey, this like coming full circle now 20 years later that you're talking about this stuff more, that you're like, wow, I actually did this once, and not knowing it was going to work. It actually did work.
Yeah. And I referenced in that video, I don't know if you guys caught this, but we also legally stocked a small lake in Winnipeg I think that was about like 12 or 15 years ago, where we got a fish transfer permit. And since it was like a nature center, we were able to get the permit, and we transferred, I think it was 50 crappies. And with that one, we didn't use a cage because we used fin clips to keep them happy all day in the live well, fin clips. And then when we went to release them at the end of the day, I can't remember, it was 48 or 49 of them all swam away and were totally fine. So I don't have data on how they moved or did moving forward, but I know that we didn't deal with a bunch of fish that couldn't right themselves or whatever like that. So you get information, like little tidbits from anecdotal experiences like that, but then you also just compare stories with people. And even over the last couple of weeks, you guys can probably imagine all the different random little tidbits and emails I'm getting from people who are like One specific example was a guy on Lake Erie who kept a pail full of 14, 15-inch perch out of 50 feet of water. And when he got home to clean them, he noticed that they were still mostly kicking around. And he happened to have an aquarium for whatever reason in his garage. He dumped them in his aquarium, and they all lived for months. Like this was also the story he was telling me was from years ago. So I was like asking exacts, like, how many fish did you put in there? How many died? How many lived? And he couldn't remember specifics. All he knows is that most of them lived for months, and their eventual cause of death, he said, was deep frying, not anything else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like enough is enough. So you hear some stories like that, and it's not like people are talking about perfect scenarios and nursing these fish to life and having one survivor. They're talking about the bulk of fish living. So it just gives you enough that you can't confidently say, oh, well, barotrauma is not an issue, but you can confidently say that it's not a sweeping, 80, 90% of fish dying type statistic.
Yeah.
So-
I think that's a great point. And like just watching the video, it was, I mean, it was super cool to see how he was able to get all the ones you caught, like just back down compared to like the DNR video. I'm glad you made yours, because we talked about this in our podcast before. I watched that video and I never even thought of anything. It was just because of like the old time stories or whatever, barotrauma is bad and all this stuff, which you watch it and you're like, okay, this is right. And you did yours. And I go back and rewatch it and I'm like, how did I not notice this stuff? And just be like, oh yeah, that net's probably not right. And things like that, just in terms of making it work.
Well, not even that it was wrong, that it was just like that there weren't more questions, right? Like, I think that's what Aaron, you're saying is like no one was asking any questions as part of that, which is why you were like, hey, we should talk.
Here's a question I have too. This isn't just directed at Aaron, but like before the Angling Buzz collaboration with the Minnesota DNR, was there any other like studies that came out that were captured on video before this? Or was that, because I think that'd be the first one I saw, but is there more like out there on YouTube where?
Not necessarily video studies, but there's been quite a few studies, and I think most of them have glaring issues with the methodology of the study. And that's where, they say that this, the Lindner attempter video was just a pilot project, but there is plenty examples of published studies that are littered with issues that I think are issues, including the ones I was mentioning from Manitoba. They're published, they're peer reviewed, et cetera, and still like enough there to really question the methodology. And it doesn't take much to really skew what those results would be.
Why do you think, I mean, not that you know the answer to this question, I'm just throwing it out there. Why do you think that as from like an environmental policy standpoint of like things where, they're looking into this now more, like why is that barotrauma topic, coming up more frequently now, in your opinion?
I don't know if it's, barotrauma has been talked about lots over the years. I mean, we're talking about specifically right now because of these last couple of videos, but barotrauma has been talked about lots over the years, I feel anyways. We're talking about it even more in the last couple months, but it's come up lots. Hey, one thing I wanted to mention is it wasn't just about the general public not asking questions, but an important part of that video that was missing, and I know that, if anyone could redo it or have their way with it, they would include it, is there was no questions asked or presented by the people involved in the video. And these are questions that everybody involved in the video knew and had. Like, having talked with the different sides of the people that, or the different groups that were involved with that video, all of them, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, were aware of a lot of the things that I mentioned. And I believe them when I say that. I don't think that's them just saying, oh, yeah, we knew about that. I legitimately believe that they were aware and had thought of so many of, like, basically everything I said. And that is what was missing, is them just saying at the end, we've got to refine this. There's still a lot of questions. The net might have been an issue. And that's a very important part of all scientific research, is questioning your own methods and not like leaving it on the note they left it, because the video literally end with them saying they were very happy with how it went and they want to fine tune it a little bit, but they left you feeling like things were good. And next winter, if you were to watch a video, it would look very similar to this one based on how they wrapped it up. So that, I think that's more so what I was wanting to feel from the video is not just like the general public asking questions, but like from them more so showing that they had questions within their own methodology.
From your discussions with them after, though, did it sound like they had plans to continue that research or to do like a second round of that?
Definitely it's ongoing stuff. Like it definitely was just a pilot study. I'm just saying that that's not enough to give you license to blast it out there and have the whole angling community digest it and take it with a grain of salt. Because if that's what you want, then I mean, it's just really dangerous stuff. Like I feel like, especially for a government organization like that, if it's a pilot project and it's a rough draft, so to speak, that's why you don't put it out there until it's a published piece. Like nobody gets a chance to look at scientific papers until they're published, right? Like you wouldn't want someone reading it before it was peer reviewed. You want to have your peers or professionals looking over it, and then you put it out there for public consumption. You don't do it in some other order and let everybody on the street kind of take a look at what you're doing. And I think they just wanted to get momentum going with stuff and had already filmed it anyways, that it was like somebody decided like, let's put a piece out and we can always, keep telling the story as we go along. And there's no way that it was specifically Jeremy Smith that was like, let's hurry up and put something out there. And then him, the one that put it all together and approved it and stuff like that. Like hearing Jeremy talk about this stuff over the years in past videos and current topics, like Jeremy's clearly like one of the keenest minds we have on all these topics, right? So his affiliation with it is unfortunate, but it's just kind of, it's unfortunate and inconvenient, and it is what it is. And, I don't think it's like a smear on him whatsoever or on the Lindners whatsoever. It's just kind of like is what it is, and onward we go.
I think that's a good point. And I wonder too, like if nobody had disagreed with this, whether it would be Aaron or anyone else, would there be any discussion? Like Aaron said, when this first came out, I'm not super plugged into it, but nobody was really, everyone was kind of like, well, yeah, I guess, everything dies. But if no one had done, like what Aaron did, where would we be standing now?
No, I think that's a really good thing to bring up too, Will, because like I mean we're at the St. Paul Ice Show, various ice shows and stuff around the industry at the beginning of the year, and like a lot of the talk around there was like, did you see that video and that study? Like it was super, like really well done or whatever, and like all this stuff, and basically the agreement of everybody was like, yeah, that's great, and like Aaron said, you're taking this put out there as or I guess what we had said in our previous podcast, maybe not what Aaron had said. You were taking what they put out as like that's the word. That's what happens. Because that's the way it had kind of come across when obviously it wasn't. So I think like Will said, if he did make his video, I don't think it'd even be being talked about.
But to Aaron's point, it's kind of like it kind of had the blessing of the fish community, right? Because it was coming out from a very reputable source. Like it's not like the Minnesota DNR put this on their YouTube channel,
right? Bingo.
Independently,
yeah,
which maybe was strategic as well because they wanted to be involved with anglers and get more eyeballs on it and the whole thing. But yeah, you're right, Bart. Like I think everyone just was like, "Yep, that was good."
Yeah, that's what it seemed like all around. There was no question. So I'm glad we ended up getting the questions. And I guess so transitioning from that, the further, I guess 2 videos ago, and you show the fish swim down with live scope, get back to their level and like acclimate. Like I think we had kind of talked about, like it's very interesting to see how the fish like swim down quickly, get to a level, and you can see them like go side and acclimate their certain way. And then with your new video that you came out with the fin clips and like putting them all in, I mean, obviously like, I guess this is what I got from watching it, but you were using the fin clips and everything. Like basically what that video was you were simulating what a fish that would experience barotrauma. So you brought it out of 30 feet. It would experience barotrauma. Using the fin clips, you are now bringing it down to a level to simulate if you would have released it down to that level and it could acclimate itself, correct? Is that what the basis of the tank and the fish clips were?
The basis of the tank was just a way to observe the fish. Like ideally it wouldn't be at surface level. So the basis of the tank was just to observe the fish. And, you know, it's unfortunate that that has to be at surface level. So the fin clips was just to give the fish a little bit of a helping hand. I wasn't trying to simulate, you know, them being happy and balanced out at 30 feet, but I guess that's what it does, you know, indirectly. But best case,
because I was just thinking of like the but like the beginning of your first video where you showed the bag, right? And like you put the bag down and then it gets to a certain level and it goes down. I had thought of that representation with you using the fish clips and bringing them down. Do you get what I mean?
yeah.
So that's what I had gathered. But yeah, anyways, continue on what your thought process was behind it.
I mean, the fin clip still, like, it messes with the fish so much. And I tried to explain this is like, it looks like it took the full 4 days for those fish to acclimate, but that's just because the fish thinks it's heavier now. So it's like the fish wants more air in its swim bladder because it's heavier. So it's not wanting to acclimate as fast as it should. The best way to get the fish to acclimate is to just force it to struggle. The problem is that forcing it to struggle is stressing it and it might die during the stress period, right? So it's kind of like I'm putting the fish under so much stress for it to be in the tank, and the fin clips help it to not be stressed and fighting to stay upright, but it also does not necessarily help that fish to get acclimated in a hurry either, right? You understand what I mean about how the fish thinks it's heavier? It is taking
for
so
sure.
It actually wants more air in its swim bladder, not less, which is the opposite of what you actually want that fish to do. You want that fish to be slowly over time releasing the air from its swim bladder so that it can be comfortable at the surface waters. But if you add the weight to it, the fish thinks it's heavier. And if the fish is heavier, then it needs more air in its swim bladder. So that's why over time I was trimming the weight so that the fish would slowly acclimate to the point where by the end, I just had the clip on, no weight at all, and then eventually released the clip. And at every stage, the fish would get buoyant for a period and have to fight to sort of, you know, acclimatize. But all that's putting the fish through more stress. And what I mentioned a couple times in the videos, I'm putting the fish through way more than if it just went down to the bottom, but I'm having to do that to get an observation of the fish, essentially.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Was the second video shot on the same lake that it was shot on the first video?
Yeah, same lake. I mean, it wasn't the exact same basin because I didn't have access to get a shack on that other basin. I would have liked to do it in the same depth of water, but at the same time, I got a lot of flack for fishing out of such deep water in the first video, kind of. So it was bizarre to me how people didn't understand that I was trying to emphasize how deep the water was to get the results that I was, you know, not wanting to be questioned.
No, like the deeper you went, I was like, keep going deeper. Like, I want to see how far this goes, you know, like, does it keep going or do you reach a point of no return? And like, obviously us talking about this, like, I still don't necessarily, I guess, Aaron, good point for you to maybe bring up. Are you saying that, like, none of us are saying you should go fish that deep necessarily? You know what I mean? Or do you think it's that big of a deal?
I think it's a big deal when people are like, oh, you're encouraging people to fish in deep water or whatever. And it's like, I showcased a fish having a seizure and talked about it lots of times. And I put it on repeat 6 times. I feel like people should be terrified of seeing a fish have a seizure an hour later, because even though that's 1 in 6, what if that, you know, it's 1 in 6 for my sample size, but it's also 1 in 2 on the adults, right? I had 4 small fish and I had 2 large fish. So one out of the 2 adult fish I had in the tank had a seizure. That's pretty shocking. It all depends how you look at the results. And at the end of the day, I wish I could have a way larger sample size so that these conversations could have way more relevancy. But I think that demonstrating that even if it was only 1 in 6 having a seizure, who wants to go out and catch and release fish and know that 1 in 6 fish they're releasing are having a 100% death seizure an hour later, right? I wouldn't think any of us want to do that. I think what we're looking at, or what we should be looking at, is our angling practices are being perfected, so to speak, so that we are trending as close as we can to 100% success rate on our releases. And, you know, I know. Hey, Sam, Bart keeps trying to tee you up and he's like, Sam, do you have something you want to say? Do you have something you want to say? And it's like, I know that we all want to strive to do better and we all have lots of room to improve, but the goal, and this is like to quote something that I included in Uncut Angling TV like 11 years ago. I don't know if this quote's going to sound familiar to you guys, but the biologist that was on my show, he's like, catch and release fishing has come a long, long way, but it needs to go further. We need to realize there's so much more to just putting the fish back in the water. The goal is to release these fish properly and not just to watch them swim away, but that there's a realistic chance that they're going to live and they can be caught again someday. So it's like we are not doing enough by just saying the right thing and putting it in the water and seeing it swim away. It's like when you're transferring fish to a farm dugout, or when you have to bring a fish to weigh in, or when you have to watch a fish swim away on a live scope, any of those things give you like a longer term attachment to those fish that just watching it wave goodbye in the ice hole, that's not enough, right? And I'm picturing for Will's fishing trout sometimes in very clear, awkward situations that if your guest is overhandling that fish and letting that fish go, that fish is going to be freaking on the bottom 15 feet away from you and staring at you for the rest of the day. So the emphasis on handling that fish is probably heightened in those situations, hey?
Definitely. I think that for as much flack as fly fishing for trout gets, I think that has been on the forefront of releasing fish for probably quite a long time. I mean, it is probably, some of the most important things, the release and not handling the fish very much. And I try not to take too many pictures and all that stuff. But the nice thing is that guys that fly fish for trout are pretty bought into that whole program for the most part.
Yeah, that seems like that's been an idea for like a long time in the trout community. Like that's always been a thing.
People are kind of about it, and I think have been for a long time. So, but it's true that if you have someone that overhandles a trout, especially when the water is warmer, or the air temperature is warmer, I mean, a lot can go wrong, and sometimes they die. But yeah, I think that fly fishing, for as much grief as it gets, it has been ahead of the curve a little bit more than
what grief or flack does fly fishing get that you're talking about?
Well, I think mostly just from people that maybe don't fly fish. They kind of look at it as sort of this purist sport, which I do both. I don't just fly fish, but I think sometimes it gets sort of a bad rap, as especially trout. That it's
what was the when we were doing a weigh-in topic one day, but what was the type of fly fisherman you were talking about that you put on your like worst
Types of anglers.
like dry fly only guys,
that's okay. That's so like, there's certain
DFO.
levels where you look at it and you're like, come on, you're a little
there's DFO guys, spay guys.
Do you think that like the fish handling that's like kind of been like associated with fly anglers, especially with like trout fishermen, do you think that came about more just because those species of fish tend to be more delicate? So like anglers had to do that if they wanted to like, not be killing fish, to try to like conserve some of these, because when I think of those guys, I'm thinking like small stream anglers where there might not be like super big populations of fish.
Sure. Yeah, I think some of that for sure. Where I guide most of the years on the Missouri River tailwater section below the Holter Dam, which it's a big stretch of river. It's big, but I think that for the most part, probably guides, way before me, have been on the forefront of that, because at the end of the day, that trout is paying your bills, and you want it to live, you want to catch him again. So you do your best to make sure they live, because some days, everyone counts, so I think there's some of that too, that the guiding community and the outfitting community has done a lot to sort of push that, and that let's not handle these fish for very long. And if we don't have to take them out of the water, great, even better. So
I just think that's so different from like a lot of other freshwater species like that, like bass, right? People are throwing them in the live well, they ride them around all day in a tournament and let them go, but it's a hardy fish. Like they can, they like, you don't just roll the weight and all your fish are
boat
dead.
flip is like majorly praised,
Right.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on kind of the bass community, Aaron, as far as tournaments go? Because as far as fish handling and stuff goes, like that seems pretty crazy that they do, like in Alabama, 80-degree water temperature, you throw them in the live well, bounce around for 8 hours, pull them out, go underneath the tent, raise them up, put them in a basket, weigh them, go back over here, back into release pontoon. They go back in the lake, all in pretty high temperatures. Like, doesn't that seem kind of crazy?
I mean, like Ryan said, obviously the trout are more sensitive, but that's not reason to sort of push the limits on it. And like, like if we know that a bass or a crappie is way more hardy, that is not sort of a rite of passage to hold it out of the water while we're doing our sales pitch or whatever, like the fishing shows always did 30 years ago. And we've improved, but we haven't improved nearly as much as we really need to. So it's like the trout are way more sensitive. So what happens is that they literally die in your hands, or they die like 8 feet away from you. So it puts the emphasis on like doing a really freaking good job of it. Whereas the bass are a bit more hardy, and they might die, as we call it, delayed mortality. They might die a bit later. But I guess where I'm at with a lot of this delayed mortality talk is that it's predictive. Like, it's the bass that was deeply hooked, like the 1 out of 10 that dies, or whether you want to say it's 1%, 5%, 10%, I shouldn't have said 10%, but whatever percent you want to say dies, a huge amount of that is predictive. And that's where, as an angler group, we have to self-police our approach and practice selective harvest. And, like, we can't be leaving it up to, when we keep talking about delayed mortality, I feel like we're kind of playing dumb a bit, like not on purpose, but we're playing dumb in the sense of like, if we do our best, yeah, a certain percentage will die, but at least we've done our best. And it's like, well, the reality is we aren't doing our best, and we can predict to a high accuracy which ones we didn't do our absolute best on, and know to have just kept those or refined our angling techniques to be doing better. Whoa, moving forward. Sorry about this. I'm in a zoo here.
I want to bring it back, Adam, just because right before we talked about trout, kind of you were talking about the fin clips and the weights, and I have a few different questions. When Aaron's,
I'm still here.
He's still there. You're good.
Okay. I was wondering, did you do any like controls as far as like, did you ever not fin clips any fish and put them in the tank and just see how they reacted? And then obviously, like you said, it was the same like from the second video as the first video, but did you ever just release any crappies with you and your buddy out there? Or did every crappie you catch you put in the tank and you did the fin clip?
By the time we got out there, it was like 2:30 and the sun set at 4:30. So it was just like we were just trying to get 6 fish in the tank kind of thing.
Sure.
And in terms of doing like controls and all that, like I literally had to be there for 4 days just to do that sample. So it's like, without permits to properly have sample sizes and whatever, I'm pretty limited with what I can officially analyze anyways. You know what I mean? Like, I've got all sorts of anecdotal experience, just like we all do, of dealing with fish. And just like when you're in a tournament, like, I don't know if you guys have done walleye. Have you done walleye tournaments, Sam?
No.
Have you, Bart, or any of you guys done a walleye tournament?
Walleye? No, I have not.
If you've got like the slot size fish or whatever you call them, like the 16, 17, 18-inch walleyes, if you put them in your live well in the summer and you don't do something to take care of them, they're going to die for sure. Like, you have to either fizz them or fin clip them, or they're going to die, because you cannot leave a walleye like that in your tank struggling, or it's going to be dead in like 40 minutes, like, definitely. So, I mean, I think that answers your question, not to that situation, but just to a situation in general where you have to do something to take care of that fish, because you can't leave it stressed. Like, you can't leave it struggling.
Have you caught a lot of walleyes in walleye tournaments where their air sac is completely blown out of their mouth? Because just recreationally walleye fishing, I've caught a lot of walleyes out of deep water where their air sac is absolutely through their mouth, like blown out.
Well, you fizz them, and I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think but when you fizz them, it sucks back in or whatever, and it's definitely an issue of ethics with tournaments. Is like, you are legitimately just trying to keep the fish alive to weigh in. You are not worried about the long term of that fish, because I mean, I don't ever fizz fish recreationally, but then I get in a tournament and it's like, yeah, I'm going to fizz the fish because all I care about is getting that fish to the end of the day, which might sound savage. But when they're doing permits for tournaments, they're building in that those fish are kept. Like, they aren't permitting a tournament and not pretending that the 100 boats that are fishing and the limits are accounted for as kept, Does that make sense? Like they're not thinking that
Yeah.
those are released and happy fish.
It does, but like not even talking in a tournament situation, but like, I don't know. I feel like every time I've caught a walleye super deep and it's completely blown out of its mouth, I'm like,
I
there's
can
no
think
way.
of one time,
even if I
Sobi.
fizz it, there's like, yeah,
we were filming the one. We were fishing smallmouth out in like 30 to 40 feet. Just
Brock
catch and
hooks
release
a
fishing.
28-inch walleye and the air sac is completely blown out of its mouth. There's like, do you really think fizzing that fish would bring the air sac back in? Like, there's no way.
Yeah, because the air is gone. Like I don't know what happened with that one. Did it swim away, or what happened with that fish you're talking about?
No,
It
we just
tasted
kept it.
phenomenal.
Yeah, we just kept it because like
We believed it was gonna die.
I'm under the understanding if that air sac is just blown through its mouth, there can be no way. There can be no way
that's
it
like
goes back.
that's an honest question there. Like, have you done that with other fish? Because I guess there's also a thing with that discussion of barotrauma, right? Like, what's the point of no return where you do need to make a decision of like I'm selectively harvesting like correctly? You know what I mean? Like, is it like capillaries bursting, bug eyes, like air sacs out the mouth? You know what I mean? Like, what would your line be that you're telling people like, hey, if you experience this, probably keep it. Otherwise, just get a quick release and handle the fish correctly.
I don't want to be answering that question, and I don't want to be talking about what the maximum depth is. And that's why when I established 5 rules or guidelines or keys to approaching deep water fishing, the first one was just avoid doing it and don't do it. So there's my get out of jail free card right off the bat. Is it's like,
sure,
yeah. And then built into that is if you do it, just keep everything you catch, because then it's the same thing. You're not playing God and staring at the fish and saying, well, does this have enough symptoms that I can be relatively sure? Like, I appreciate the question you guys are asking, because it's like, it'd be nice to have as good of a guess as you can. But if you're getting into a situation where you're not sure about that stuff, it's like, it would just be better if you weren't fishing that deep. And if you do fish that deep, you're fishing just that deep for harvest. And
here's a better way to formulate the question. Have you caught a walleye super deep and seen the air sac blown through its mouth?
Yeah, definitely.
Have you ever tried fizzing a fish that has an air sac blown through its mouth?
I've released fish that have the air sac blowing out of their mouth and they've swam away, and I don't know exactly what happens. And I've fizzed fish that have the air sac blowing out of its mouth, and you seem to be able to get them through to the end of the day. If I'm fizzing a fish, it's in a tournament, right? So yeah, I've definitely caught eater-sized walleye where I don't know if that's actually the air sac or if it's the air sac pushing other stuff out of its mouth. Like exactly.
I think it's their stomach is inverted out the front of their.
Okay.
But the
air sac would be right behind it, so you're seeing parts of its stomach and part of the air sac too. And it all does suck back in once you fizz it, because you're literally. I wish that they called it popping and not fizzing, because I feel like that would be a little bit more accurate and not putting a happy kind of vibe on it. Because fizzing sounds like you're doing this fish a favor, but if we always said that we're popping the fish, I feel like it would be like, oh, you popped the fish.
Yeah. Well, and Sam, like I mean, it doesn't sound like maybe we have like a good answer to this question collectively here, but like I know I talked about this when we brought this up on the last pod, but it was like I would be curious to see I'm assuming that there's been research done in saltwater on this for a lot of deep water species like snapper and grouper and things like that, because they've even created, like things to like descending devices to return fish to these depths, in the ocean, and when you're catching fish out of 100, 200 feet of water. And I got to think that there's something out there that provides some research to justify why those things work, because these fish, when they catch them, you catch this red snapper. It's
a lot of those red snappers, are completely blown out.
And I mean, it's a more substantial fish, right? We're not talking about a 14-inch crappie or something. We're talking about like a 20-pound fish, which whatever. But I mean, the symptoms would be the same. You know what I mean? What they experience. Yeah. And I just feel like there's other maybe like things out there where this has been discussed maybe more in depth, or like people have, looked into this for a longer period of time, not just about like catching fish out of deep water, but like what symptoms do they actually succumb to over time versus what things are like, wow, that looks really bad, but they can overcome those and survive still. Like, I think that's an important question too. Cause like Aaron's video, the second one that came out here, I really liked the fact that like, it wasn't like you were saying like, oh, I'm saying this is the same thing as just like letting him go. And, we're just going to look at him in the tank. But it was more like there were fish that had visible symptoms of what we would consider barotrauma that you could like watch not die. You know what I mean? like the things like, you know, having their eyes popping out a little bit and having some capillary bursting looking stuff around their mouth area. And like, those would be things like Bart, like when we fished some of those deep lakes, like we saw that and we're just like, oh, this thing's toast, you know?
Yeah.
But like, he was able to show, like, I don't know that having him in the tank's the same thing as letting him go. Like, I wouldn't draw that conclusion, but I would definitely say that like they were able to survive that in your kind of controlled environment that you created there, which I thought was pretty cool.
Hey, you know, they've definitely done studies on measuring the survival rate of fish that have been fizzed and stuff. And as much as I'm very much anti-fizzing, they have done studies to show that the fish, that membrane does heal up surprisingly quickly, like within hours, and the fish can rebalance itself and survive quite nicely. The problem is that the best studies that they've done that have showcased this, it also has a fish under like ideal situations for healing and not out in the wild where, okay, that fish is battling with likely infection, likely predators, likely all this other stuff. So they've demonstrated that the bass swim bladder can heal and will heal in not too long. Like, it's not like, here I'm saying popped. I don't want to be too savage about that, because I do think that there's a chance that if we as an angler group can't avoid some of those situations that fizzing's needed, then there is a place for it, because the fish can heal from it. We just haven't fully explored how the fish are going to react to other external stuff going on besides just the healing of that swim bladder.
Do you feel, because like, I mean, obviously this is stuff that's like happening in nature, right? I mean, this isn't like you could do this in like a pool, right? But it's not the same. Like they're very different things. I mean, do you think that is it feasible to even really like draw these conclusions without seeing it happen in like something like a test lake, like where they're saying like, we're going to use this body of water as our grounds for doing this research, versus like these, you know, like we're going to do one sample size on this lake, see what happens. But realistically, they're creating a lot more variables by having nets, having an enclosure, having anything else that's not just their natural environment. I mean, does that seem like the only way to really do it would be to have almost a test body of water to do the research in?
Maybe, but for the most part, I'm not that concerned with it, because whether the mortality is, you know, 10% or 50% or whatever the mortality is, that's me really spitballing. I don't think it's 50. I don't think it's anywhere close to 50, but if you go deep enough, it is going to get closer to 50. Regardless of what it is, we know enough and we have enough options available to us that we can avoid those situations that are going to be hard on the fish. And we have that ability right now. So all this like investment into science and paying attention to that is like, okay, great. If we can really figure that out at some point, fine. But right now we can do things to clean up our angling behaviors like effective immediately. So that's where it feels like, what are we even worried about? And that's one of the objections that I had right off the bat to this study is like, we're trying to figure out exactly what the effect of the barotrauma is, but something that we know is an issue of prolonged fish handling is what we're killing these fish with. And let's just clean up on that, you know, like work on those immediate releases. And, you know, one thing that jumped out at me, I watched pretty much all of you guys, the podcast where you guys were talking about my video. One thing that popped out at me is multiple times you guys said that I got the fish back in the water so quickly. And that kind of caught me off guard, because I actually didn't release them that quickly. Like, I actually caught each one and brought each one up to the camera, talked about each one for a few seconds, and then went back and released them. So it's like, yeah, I was mindful to release them pretty quickly, but it wasn't like catch the fish, boom, right back down. And I don't think there was like any of them that I did that. And the one that I actually stressed quite a bit, it's like I caught it, then I had to move the tripod, then I had to go get an ice scoop. I like relocated several times. By the time I did all that, there is no reason that an angler should be doing that kind of fussing around with a fish that they plan to release. So here I am trying to be ultra quick to maintain the integrity of my study or whatever, which is emphasizing the quick releases, I am handling the fish longer than the average person should be handling it, and longer than us in media should ever be demonstrating handling a fish. So just to say, it's like I wasn't actually rushing them back more crazy than we should be doing on an everyday basis in our media and angling activities.
I think this go
ahead,
for it, Adam.
Sobi.
I think this sparks an idea too. You talking about the release, like, and I know this is a question that's come up between us guys and a lot of other folks too. Is like, where did you come up with this release method of you close the mouth, flip them over, let them go? I've never seen anybody do this.
Yeah, that was the most mind-blowing thing.
And I don't think I've ever seen you do that to a crappie in any of your previous videos either. Like, is that something brand new that you've been playing with, or like, where did you get that release idea? And
there's
what's the
nothing
process behind it.
There's nothing specific about that. Like that's another thing I was going to mention is it isn't as revolutionary as maybe you guys are thinking with that. Like the only reason I was doing it so methodically and particularly there is since like I'm dealing with a small sample size and I'm watching the release and stuff, is I just wanted to make absolutely sure, more than even getting the air out, is that not a little bit of slush got in there. So that's why I was like putting it in that way, to visually see that there's nothing in the mouth. But like if I were to go out casually catch and releasing on my own, I might not even put them in backwards and do all that. I was only doing that to be like as absolutely sure as I can that there wasn't a speck of slush in their mouth.
Okay, gotcha.
Because I think that for the most part, if you just put them straight in, the air is going to come out the gills unless the mouth is cocked open. You know how it gets locked open?
Yeah.
As long as you close the mouth, the air is going to get out the gills. There could be a little dot of air that gets caught just on the entrance to their throat, but 90% of the air is going to go out anyways. It's the slush that you need to be so careful about, because when you let them go, if they do one shake, they'll get all the air out, but a little bit of slush in their gills or their mouth, that's not thawing anytime soon, and that's what's going to get them. So I might have actually like emphasized or not explained that as thoroughly as I should have, that it wasn't even as much about the air as it was just making sure that there was no snow or slush in there and just being careful with it.
That's cool to know.
I don't know if I believe that though. I feel like that slush would melt extremely fast. Cause like, like air temperature with water, like the water that's on top, that's frozen. Even water that's down a couple inches from the top of that ice, it's much warmer. Just like that's how those ice defenses and everything works to keep your holes open, is like it's bringing up warmer water. So once you think like you've put even shavings of ice or ice cubes in a glass of water, and it's like, boom, it melts really, really fast. Kind of on the same token, I would think a piece of slush in his mouth, once he dives down a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, that'd melt instantly, I would think.
Or I guess, yeah.
But instantly might mean 30 seconds or a minute, because like the water right at the surface is 0, like you said, and it isn't too far down.
Celsius.
Yeah.
So you said 0. You said 0. I'm like, we're a Fahrenheit crew, not Celsius.
Fahrenheit.
Big Fahrenheit guy.
It's right at Fahrenheit. And Sam's absolutely right. It warms up super quick when you're going down. Like it's not warming up drastically, but even if a foot below, it's now, let's say 34 degrees in your language. And with the ice defense system, pushing 34-degree water up in your hole keeps the hole open, but it takes time to melt that slush. And with the crappie, it is so critical that on their whatever remaining strength they have, that they use all that strength to get back down to the bottom. So if they have a mouthful of slush and all of a sudden they do go under and they go against the bottom of the ice, even if that slush we're saying is going to melt in not too long, the water right against the ice is going to be so close to 32. Because like if it was any warmer right against the ice, that ice would be melting. But you know that ice is at that pivotal point where it's literally 32 right underneath. So if the fish goes under and he gets hung on the ice and he's got a little bit of slush in his mouth, he has no chance. Whereas if he goes under and he has nothing in his mouth and he gets hung against the ice, he can chill there for a second and like or minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. We don't know. Just because if I were to watch on the camera or somebody else were to watch on the live scope and see the fish go down and then come up and get stuck against the bottom of the ice, that doesn't mean fatal either. That fish might sit there for 5 minutes and chill out and eventually somersault down and get another chance at it. So even with that, we need like a longer term study to truly get a feel for what's going to happen to that fish. But
that'd be cool to see. Definitely. Where like you are on a lake and you almost like you don't close their mouth, but just where you see some of them go underneath the ice and just see how many of them come out of that, or if they all stay there. That'd be cool, especially on thin ice where you could see
Sam,
it.
I think we're saying the same thing in a lot
Yeah.
of senses. Like maybe I was emphasizing the slush too much, but certainly the slush in their mouth be way worse than air because they can for sure get air out. But if you know when you put a fish in the water and it gets like that mouthful of slush, that can be stuck in there kind of like cement, and it's not like they can just go like this and it's instantly going to free up and all get out of there. So that's like, in my mind, that's a lot more dangerous and more of a concern than having some air in its mouth. But either way, my process there was just to be so meticulous to make sure its mouth was clear because, you know, again, what I was saying when I brought Will into this with like seeing a trout die in a crystal clear pool that's 15 feet from you, when I'm watching those fish on the live scope and I've got a limited sample size, I have such a huge vested interest in that fish getting back down, which is crazy because that should always be our interest in anglers, not just when I'm trying to demonstrate that the angling buzz study was. It should always be of paramount interest is rushing that fish back in the water. And yeah, I mean, the whole industry just needs to be doing a better job of it all the time.
So Aaron, I was going to kind of bring into this, I guess, conversations you and I have had in the past like few weeks, but with like you being here and like obviously we film, you know, fairly decently sized YouTube series. Sobi does his thing. You have yours. We got Jay, Clayton Schick, like those guys out there doing media now. Like there's a lot of us that are younger, kind of doing it now compared to the old, you know, TV style, right? The other stuff going on. And I know, you know, when you came in with Uncut Angling, for my belief, it was you did things differently, you know, and showed proper, or what you would say proper fish care and really fish handling and stuff like that. Like I'm saying with what's going on now, like how do we do it better to get to where you want to see it, where you feel like the industry's behind? You get what I'm saying? Like we can, like just the people sitting here right now, like we can do a fairly decent job of like showing that the right way and expressing that in different routes. So that's what I'm curious on is like, hey, so you showed this stuff off and you know, the barotrauma thing, like showing how we need to understand the studies correctly. But the main premise of it is handle fish better. So how do we get to that and really go that way? You get what I mean?
Yep. Good question. I really like that, the angle you're going with that, and like the idea that we can all together really make a big impact here. I think for me, over the course of Uncut Angling filming, is the checks and balances was the healthy release, because you have that fish that you need to get your media with or whatever. But for me, always the release has been such an important part of it, where if we don't get a healthy if we don't get a healthy release, there's been plenty of examples, especially back doing the TV show and stuff, where I've stitched in, like cheated and stitched in a release from a different fish, because the healthy release is so freaking important. So I've dropped the ball, not gotten the healthy release, and that, you know, puts the emphasis and reminds you that you need to do a better job next time. But then it's like the optics on what we do is often more important than the actual survival of an individual fish, if that makes sense. So if I overhandle a fish, and this is kind of some of the stuff Sam and I talked about earlier this week about optics more than what actually happened, is if I've overhandled the fish, shame on me. But if I can expedite what I show in the footage and demonstrate proper fish handling in the footage, even though I didn't do as good of a job as I needed to, that's an important thing that I can pass on to people, because what they see is that I've hurried the release. And that's something that before I started Uncut Angling, Jay and I would sit down and we would watch In Fisherman, because that was kind of like the top level show, and critique what they did that we liked and critique what they did that we didn't like. And the number one thing that we didn't like was holding a fish and talking about what's going on. It's like there's plenty of time to do that once you release the fish. That is not your sales pitch time where you get to talk about, you know, bungee leeches or whatever the latest and greatest thing is that's been released. So I guess where I was going with that to answer your question is the checks and balances for all these years for me has been getting the healthy release. That's been the incentive to hurry my fish handling, because I know that I need to get the healthy release. Well, now the cool thing is with forward facing sonar is if we are constantly checking for the healthy release on our own, like, you know, like what's already started. I'm sure you guys have seen on other videos, people are now like starting to watch their fish on the sonar, we're going to be policing ourselves real quick, and we're going to be reinforcing to ourselves whether we overhandled that fish or not. And I mean, we'll pass it along to our viewers as able and showcase the fish swimming away as able. But more than anything, we're going to tell ourselves and learn ourselves when we aren't doing it properly, because, you know, you get your photo shoot or whatever you need to do with that big fish, you put it back in the water. It does like a uninspired kickoff, and we can tell ourselves, well, it's probably fine. But if we have to film it on the live scope swimming away, that's going to tell quite a bit, right? So we're going to be getting that checks and balances built in on its own. So I guess I'm just saying that that's going to help us police ourselves moving forward. And once we're policing ourselves that way, we're going to know that handling it that long isn't an option anymore. Like, it just isn't, right? If the aggressive release and the seeing it actually swim away on live scopes suddenly becomes a priority.
And I feel like you're kind of touching on your main point of your first video, is that forward-facing sonar can be a tool for conservation, and it's not just the wipeout technology.
Yeah, definitely. Like, watching them swim away is just like, holy smokes, that I ever put an emphasis on it. Because I was, like I said about Will, he's in crystal clear water. I am not in crystal clear water like ever. I'm always in water where it's like, okay, healthy release for 3 or 4 feet, pan the camera away, good enough, right? That's all you get to see. But now if you have the forward facing sonar and you're watching that fish swim away for 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, suddenly it's like, you know, it's very telling.
Yeah.
I got a question for you too. And this is just, I don't know, these are just my wheels spinning as conversations happening. Like, do you think, obviously, maybe you've tested this on a lot of lakes, maybe you haven't, and this isn't a question just at Aaron, everybody else too. Do you think it really depends lake to lake? And can some lakes be way more affected by barotrauma than others? And this is just coming from personal experience where I've fished certain basins where it seems like it's not possible. These fish are so stiff that it's like, whether you close them mouth or do anything, it just seems like no, and the signs are wicked. And then other lakes, it seems like, okay, I'm seeing slight signs of barotrauma, but it's not nearly as bad. And I'm even in deeper water. I don't know. It just seems like maybe it's because of the area I'm fishing where there's not a lot of deep natural lakes. It just seems like it's very different lake to lake. Just thoughts and feelings on that, the whole crew.
I would say on our end, like, we spend obviously a ridiculous amount of time targeting and fishing crappies. We don't go, with that said, we don't go beyond a certain point, which generally is like 25-ish feet around there. And a lot of the fish we catch are in 10 to 15 anyways, but
well, that's not true. You've done a lot of deep water fishing in Maine and stuff like that and seen.
Yeah, but we didn't fish very deep in Maine. We fished like 27 and they were suspended
the
up
lakes
like 10
were
feet.
deep. The lakes were deep.
Yeah,
but
but we weren't in an area. So what I was going to
Yeah.
say with that is, and I think Pink would agree with me on this, is we've seen, like, say you're way up in northern Minnesota and you're on lakes where they're chasing bait a lot. They change, they go up and down a lot. They're doing a lot of different things. They act a lot more differently. So like, we don't go target them deeper, but you don't maybe accidentally see barotrauma at like 20 feet. Whereas, like, Pink, we've been in southern Minnesota before in 13 feet in a basin, and you reel up, you know, a 15-inch 2-pound crappie and its eyes are blown out and you're like, what? Like, I'm in 13 feet. And that's a little different, I think, because, you know, those fish they're not going up and down as much. They're just mud trolling for bugs. That would be my thoughts on it. But once again, we don't go out that, like, we never go to a point where, say, we were to catch something very, very large, people would be able to question, like, is this correct or not? You know what I mean?
And I'm not even talking your duration of filming Crappie Chronicles, but like, we used to do lots of winters up at Bemidji where we go up there over Christmas break, Adam. We're fishing a variety of lakes, small sloughs to small little lakes that got crazy basins all over. And it just seemed like some lakes, they were way affected, and other lakes, they weren't as much. And that's kind of what my main question is. Like, I just wonder how much it differs from lake to lake, if at all.
Well, I'm saying I think it does, because, like, that prime example of, I remember
Sure.
Pink catching a freak in like 13 feet, and we were like, what? Like,
Yeah. Well-
like it made no sense. And then it happened like a lot on that lake. And we were like, we shouldn't even be doing this. Like that's where, self-policing, we're like, we're not gonna film here. Like,
Or
we
like
caught
you're
like 4 or
seeing the
5 of them, and we're like, I didn't know these fish were gonna do this. I don't feel right doing this. I'm gonna leave.
Yeah,
And it was
like
even
you're seeing the
shallow.
effects more dramatically, like especially with the eyeballs. I think that's like the biggest one is like, yeah, like Bart, you said, like even somewhere it was under 20 feet, you catch them and like their entire eyeball is like out of their head. You know what I mean? Versus like some of these other ones, you catch them out of 25 feet of water and they really don't look like super bug-eyed or anything. Like I don't know if you can't, maybe you just can't generalize like, this is what affects like a crappie out of this deep of water doesn't just have across the board the same reaction. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely
Like,
not.
I guess I don't know how to like explain that, but there's got to be, I don't even know if there is a way to explain it at this point. That might be like further down the
Go
line.
ahead, Aaron.
Go for it, Aaron. Yeah.
So if you're fishing for a crappie, like those ones that you see on the fish finder that aren't moving whatsoever, those ones where they're just
Yeah.
like, it's like a crappie you'd see in a fish tank. That crappie, I'm pretty confident to say, is representative of the depth it's in, because it can't sit motionless and isn't going to want to sit motionless unless it's neutral, right? Like the fish in my fish tank with the fake swim bladder. So if the fish is in 28 feet and it is just hung, just sitting there, then I think he is representing what a crappie would behave like coming out of 28 feet. But if you have those crazy schools that come in and he comes in at 28 feet, then he could have been coming from deeper or shallower, because like we see, like a smallmouth can be in 20 feet of water and he can zoom up and hit a top water. So it's like, that's why people say, oh, well, I was only trolling for muskies with my crankbait down like 10 feet and this muskie had crazy barotrauma, or I was only fishing with a jerkbait 5 feet down and this smallmouth had crazy barotrauma, right? So I think exactly what you guys are all saying, it definitely can vary like crazy from situation to situation. And the only way that you can kind of get more of a vibe on it, I think, is if the fish is like not moving whatsoever, then he's like representing the depth he's in. But it's like, it's highly dependent on situation to situation. And that's where it's awesome. Again, like Bart said, like self-policing and like realizing what you're doing, realizing if the fish is releasing properly and whether you overhandled it or whether the situation is such. And then, that is so much more powerful than regulation regulation. Like if regulation were to say, hey, well, there's nobody allowed to crappie fish deeper than 28 feet, that wouldn't nearly be as powerful as if every person out there understood what they were doing and the ramifications so that they could be safer in general. Because it's probably not good to be targeting crappie in 28 plus feet anyways, but if they're in 20 feet and they start to experience the things that you guys are describing from that story with Bart and Pink, then you can self-regulate in 15 or 20 feet, or 13 feet, you said, right?
Yeah, it was, that fish was way shallow.
Yeah, and I've never seen that again either, it
was just that lake. Yeah.
Right.
But I think that's just a good overall statement too, that I feel like you just said, Aaron, is self-policing seems way better than a generalized regulation across the board. That's going to just, like we said, it differs lake to lakes, and just self-policing will help us make better decisions and not just, oh, this is just the law, 28 feet, can't go here.
Okay, but if we aren't quickly here getting like kind of perfect with our fish handling and things that we can manage, like what is the expression? Control your controllables type thing.
Yeah.
If we aren't quickly getting that way, then it's not too far-fetched that either this technology or the next generation should be policed. Like I think I come across as being anti-regulation and anti anything that's going to stop us with technology and stuff. I mean, I don't know. I don't think you guys would categorize me that way, but I think that we would all get categorized that way by the guy that wants to just sit on his pail and fill his pail. He would think that we're just out there to just have, open commerce and new technology and unregulated and just go out there and do whatever we want to do. And I'm definitely not in that mindset. Like I'm okay with regulation and I'm okay with technology being limited, because I think that the number one goal is sustainable fisheries. And if we can't do it through education, then we need to use regulation. We gotta get there and protect the fishery one way or another.
Well, and I think that's what I was getting towards too, Aaron, is like with it, right? Like we see the technology and we're going and doing a lot and catching a lot more fish, a lot more big fish. And as we educate people how to catch a lot more fish and a lot more big fish, more people will be doing it. And if we're not teaching people the correct way to handle them, and like it's the same thing, the old adage of like for us crappies, for example, it's like, hey, over 12 inches, we let these ones go. Like it's also the okay, we need to handle this fish quickly, and you preach on that. Like that is the next thing where it's like, okay, we need to make sure we do this, otherwise we're going to have a problem in like 10 to or whatever the years are,
I think
with
it's the
more and
first
more and more people handling them. You know what I mean?
it might be the next thing, but it should have been the first thing. Like it should be the first and easier thing, because there's like some theory attached to like, whether we release the big ones or the small ones, and like the government even wiggles their slot sizes around and their theories on what's best for a fishery. But the number one thing we can do is, if we're releasing a fish, we can be as responsible as we can with doing the best job that we can with releasing the fish, and not just saying that, but doing it. And I feel like with old school fishing shows over the years, there's a lot of like saying the right thing, but then not necessarily doing the right thing. And like, there'll be, for as long as I can remember, talk of selective harvest and properly releasing fish within the magazine, but you still have a cover shot on the magazine of a trophy fish that's clearly stressed to heck and been involved in some elaborate photo shoot. And it's like, what's the, like, it's tough, like it's tough.
Yeah.
But I
Because I
think
know you need to get fish media too to be able to tell the story, I suppose. But
yeah.
I mean, do it quicker. I don't know. Do a still out of a video. Like you don't need, like, I can't remember the last time I really took the time to take really nice photos. And I shouldn't say that, because I really don't like when someone compares how they think things should be doing directly to themselves, because I feel like that's not fair when they're like, well, the way I would have done it or the way I do it. And it's like, okay, we need to talk about more like averages and what's realistic, and not just about like me versus you type thing,
Yeah. Like we're documenting, right? Like really, really big fish, and we're doing it like for us anyways. It's when a large fish is caught, it's like all hands on deck, everybody drops everything for the most part. It's like guys running, getting bigger cameras, whatever we need to do. I can't tell you how many times I've had to like warm up my hands for 20 or 30 minutes because I catch a big one and my hand is just dipped down a hole, and I now am voluntarily getting my hands frozen, making sure this fish stays in a good environment for us to film this, take a picture quick, and get it back as quick as we can. And I think maybe that stuff, people don't necessarily see as well, but it's like we're practicing it, and we can probably show like this is what we're actually doing to make sure we take care of this. It's not just this, it is a quick turnaround time and everything. But yeah, I guess like you're saying, Aaron, it's just showing the proper way of doing it.
What I want to see you get, Bart, in the future is get the most epic, energetic, cinematic, healthy release. Put the emphasis on that, because I think you guys are doing a decent
I can
job.
do that. I'll put the cinematic epic drop on the release. I like that.
I think you guys are doing a decent job, but I think that if you look back at a lot of your releases, they're not necessarily the most energetic releases. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's very fair. I always take that. Yeah. Whatever we could improve on.
You can't fake an energetic release. Like, when we're out there just strictly hammering on them and there's no media attached, how those fish release. They release a lot different than when there's a little extra media involved. So if your emphasis was on getting like sick releases of like charged up angry fish, well, you can't fake that. There's only one way to get it, and it's got to be a quick release.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point. I agree with that.
Yeah. And I think just collectively, like across the board for like fishing media stuff, like if that's the message that's being like echoed by everybody, it doesn't take long for that stuff to catch on, like if everyone's giving that messaging that like this is what we need to be doing, I don't think it's that far-fetched that it's like people are just going to start doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of bounces into my next question, just like, I guess that relates to spoke into existence. And that was kind of like something you reiterated in video number 1, just like we're talking about now. If, if we have healthier practices, it might be spoken into existence that this is the way we need to treat fish. But also you kind of talked about, if we're not careful, legislation can be spoken into existence. Just, this is about like your video number 1 section where you kind of really touched on how forward facing sonar can be a conservation tool. But like, is there any other regulations that have been implemented from media references in the fishing world? So like, have there been media references or a piece done or something done that was spoken into existence that turned to regulation? Is that making sense how I'm asking the question maybe?
With forward-facing sonar?
Not with forward-facing sonar, with
Just
anything.
in general.
Like,
Okay,
Have you seen that happen in the hunting world potentially?
yeah, maybe that's a good comparison. Like,
Well, yes, but I mean, I think it's a little different because I think some of those decisions are a little more politically charged than there are in the fishing industry. Not that it isn't, but like for instance, like Utah banning like use of trail cameras. That's one of the new ones that kind of came out. That was well, not the first, but it's definitely one of like the larger, headline type things that's come along in like restriction of technology in sporting.
yeah, that's a good,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one, and that's comparable.
You're wicked delayed again, Pink, if you want to
Pop out and come back in.
Oh,
But yeah, Aaron, anyways, you can go with that too.
Will, are you on Hinge in Argentina over there when you're on your screen there?
Well, I was trying to look up. There was this study that was done, and it's not super related to crappies, but it was done on Clearwater River steelhead, and they put these tags in the fish, in the wild fish, because here there's wild fish and there's hatchery fish, right? And they put these pit tags into these wild fish, and then all the guides, this was before my time, but had scanners, so you could scan it for the tag, and then they could see how many times that fish was caught. And I was looking at the results of it, and it's interesting because the wild fish were caught less than the hatchery fish were, and the survival rate of the wild fish was actually fairly high, like 93%. But it's interesting because Idaho, you're allowed to take wild steelhead out of the water. Like you can take them out of the water for pictures and stuff. And in Oregon, you can't. And so earlier we were talking about, does it differ from lake to lake? With crappies, are some fish, more hardy than others. And so I was thinking about these Idaho fish, they've traveled, by the time we catch them here, 450 river miles, and they go over 8 dams. So are these fish just a hardier fish because they've been, genetically built
they've seen shit
to travel this far? I mean, it's pretty staggering when you catch one of these fish and look at it and think that it came from the ocean, and so I don't know if that is really comparable to, crappie fishing in lakes, but maybe some fish are just built to be a little bit more hardy based on their environment,
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure. Hybrids.
And also, like, sorry if I've said this recently somewhere else or something, because I feel like I talk about this a lot, but like fish are like extremely tough and extremely sensitive at the same time, and that's where I feel like sometimes these scientists, they're used to handling fish at the hatchery or whatever, where they can beat the fish up and throw fish around. And whenever they're doing nets and sampling stuff, it's always during cold water periods. So they're like hauling fish out of nets and throwing them around on bump boards and tossing them aside the boats. Like if you watch fisheries workers handle fish, it's like pretty brutal, but they know what they can get away with because like you're working with fish that are in these tanks. If you were handling them barbarically and half of them were dying, you would know the next day when you come into work, right? So they know what they can get away with. So as much as it seems barbaric, in those conditions, it's fine. But then if you were to take those conditions or that handling methodology and apply it to a fish that's already stressed from barotrauma, for example, or a fish that's already stressed from being deeply hooked, or a fish that's already stressed from warm water being a huge one, then instantly that fish is just dead. It's like you can't combine a couple of those key things. And I don't know, Will, how much of those river situations are ice cold or not. If those fish are battling a lot of that stuff in super cold water, then I'm sure that gives them a huge edge to it. Like, is their migration done during like what water temperature periods?
So these fish here, the steelhead, they will come into the Columbia River in the summertime, like July. So they'll enter the river system then, and then the water is warm, I mean,
Yeah.
warm in comparison, but then they are just flying upriver. They're not really stopping at all.
Yeah.
Until they can get to some cold water. There's a few places where the mouth of the Deschutes is, there's colder water coming in, then they'll hold. But then once they get here, like end of September, usually, then they start to get to cooler water, and then they'll start to slow down and they'll sort of start moving up. But now, yeah, our water temperatures it was 34 degrees 2 days ago, I guess is when I last fished. But yeah, when they first enter that river system coming out of the ocean, I mean, it's a total shock. They want to move fast until they get closer to where they're spawning. And then they're going beyond me here. They're going into tributaries of the Clearwater, another 50 miles, some of them. So
it would be remarkable to compare how you could handle that trout when it's in that 35-degree water compared to if it was caught by chance on the Columbia by someone and they hauled it into the bottom of their boat. Like, because I'm assuming the Columbia, when they come in July, must be like 75 degrees or 80 degrees or something, right? Wouldn't it be crazy warm?
Oh, I'm sure it's a little bit cooler than that, but
Okay.
it's I don't know exactly, but it's certainly a lot warmer than it is here now once they get to, I mean, sort of the end goal. I mean, they're just trying to make it to the gravel, but once they get here, they do slow down, and they'll start to kind of shift upriver.
Hey, Sam, to answer your question, sorry to divert that, but I was really curious what Will was doing on his phone. To answer your question, my comment wasn't because I've necessarily noticed things specifically spoken to in existence that way. I think more so what I'm used to is having zero warning signs when regulations come in, and all of a sudden you just have a new regulation and you had no opportunity to know about it or have any hint of it. So when I was hearing and seeing this and seeing like a 76% mortality attached to concern about live scope, I don't feel like I'm personally going to have a conversation with somebody before they decide to ban live scope or live scope generation 6 or whatever. Nobody necessarily is going to come ask me personally. So if I start sensing anything trending towards something like that, I'm just super sensitive, because usually you don't hear about anything with the rules here in Manitoba anyways. There's no opportunity to talk about it before it happens. So
I would say it's the same way here too, where just regulation happens, and it's not like they put out a statement afterwards like, this is why this is being implemented. So,
or an opportunity to talk about it. And in fairness, how many people are they really supposed to talk to about this stuff, right? Like what I've hinted at is that I think we need to have a committee of experts, and I don't know how you quantify these experts, because it's not just sport fishing type experts, but you need to have a committee of experts involved in these decisions, angling specific experts, outside of just the science world. And the type of people they need to find is people that have a stake in angling, aside from one, how am I trying to word this?
You need different user groups. Is that what you're...
You need different user groups, but the true experts that you need is somebody who represents and is familiar with different user groups. Like even us here, we're representing different states and provinces. We've got Will here as a key person who's abandoned ice fishing altogether and offering these insights from outside the ice belt. But otherwise, typically what you get when you have these conversations, and I wasn't at this Panfish Symposium that happened this last week or whatever, but I am sure that there were so many people that put their hand up to talk, and they're literally just offering up opinions that is exactly what involves their backyard. And that is, it's sort of valuable, but it's also sort of like a waste of time to hear in a way, because you need to hear from someone who has 6 different backyards to compare them all to, and not just someone who's like, well, what I've noticed here on my home lake. It's like, okay, great, but I don't want to have 1,000 conversations. I need to be able to talk to people who have been to different areas. I mean, with you guys with the Crappie Chronicles, now you're traveling to Maine to crappie fish. So the amount of different insights you're getting about crappie fishing is just phenomenal. And those are the type of insights that we need when we're having these conversations about regulations and it would just be really nice to have that brought in. In Manitoba here now, we have a slot size on crappie, and I am very confused where it came from or who decided.
What is it? I haven't heard of that.
I'm gonna have to translate. It's 35 centimeters, so that's just under 14 inches. Everything over has to be released.
Okay,
That's pretty sweet.
But it's sweet in what sense? You personally think it's sweet? Because I'm sitting here thinking, like, who decided? I didn't have an opinion. I didn't get to offer my opinion on it, so it's tough for me to get excited about that. Can someone show me all the science or the panel of experts that decided on this? Because if I wasn't involved in the conversation, then now you need to tell me who was involved and explain it to me, because otherwise I feel like I've been invested here long enough with crappie fishing specifically that I wanted to have a voice in that decision. Right. So that's, where I would challenge on it.
Is there a lot of places in Manitoba or Saskatchewan where they regulate from lake to lake, or do they have a lot of broad regulations in Canada?
Usually it's broad or else it's regional, because like here, like a lot of your states are more like square shaped sort of thing compared to here. We're a lot more like north south. Like I'm a lot closer to the Twin Cities than I am to northern Manitoba. So our regulations are more like there'll be a southern regulation, central regulation, and a northern regulation, and that's exactly how Saskatchewan is too. You asked about Saskatchewan, Manitoba,
but you wouldn't pull up to like an access at a lake and there's a sign with different regulations on it than you would typically see at another
for the most part. No, our regulations are a fraction of the complexity as yours are, but Ontario is more complex than your regulations because Ontario spans such a huge area east to west that they actually, like, their regulations would be considerably more intricate than Minnesota.
And see, that's where I kind of go back to. I do think if lakes are regulated from lake to lake, kind of how some of them are in Minnesota, I do think you almost need those backyard opinions like we were just talking about, where like if you're making broad regulations, you do want, a whole panel of people and field experts that have broad opinions and have seen a lot of different stuff. But say just like Mille Lacs Lake, for example, there's tons of regulations. They've been playing with that lake slot limits, turning it off to walleyes, turning it back on. They say the lake's not healthy, but it's like, I would love a panel of the top 10 best guides on Mille Lacs or longest ones there, or people that spend the most time on Mille Lacs to be on like a specific board. And the DNR goes with them and talks with them before making generalized regulations on Mille Lacs Lake, just because like there's always been this mantra that like the walleyes are no good, the walleyes are dying, blah, blah. You guys bass fish enough, walleyes are extremely healthy out there, and there's a million of them. But that like gets like the most severe regulation.
Yeah, well, and like we have unique regulations in the fact too, where we've seen improvements. I would say is from like a backyard theory would be seeing panfish lakes, like bluegill lakes go down to a 10 fish limit, or crappies down to 5 or whatever on certain lakes. And that's been in effect for, don't quote me, I don't know how long it is now. 3 years maybe on some, 3 to 5, something like that. And how much we've seen resurgence of size in certain lakes like that.
That's cool, and I think that's great too. But that's where I do think there needs to be panels from those backyard field experts, because they have some 5-fish, panfish regulations on lakes that do not need it at all. Example one, like maybe a Prior Lake. That lake is it's a lake in the metro.
Is that a 5-fish?
It's a 5 bluegill, I think.
Really?
The lake is loaded with tons of tiny bluegills, where generally speaking, you think they're overpopulated and stunted, where it's not like they have a huge population of quality fish that they want to protect to, dominate the resource. And they have a lot of good adult structure fish in there that will,
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm more speaking to the ones I've seen it in, I guess. And it's like, oh, I like that, because it's also like where I go catch big ones.
Yeah.
So
how is lowering the slot size though gonna, like, let's say you have a lake that's stunted out, and then you make the slot size, or sorry, the
it's limit, not slot. We don't have any slot on panfish here.
Yeah. Sorry,
from what I know.
The bag limit, is that the wording? What's the
Yeah.
You make that 5. How is that lake ever going to have trophy fish if it's
exactly? That's what I'm saying. It's like there's those regulations put in on lakes that I don't think deserve it at all, and it's very
Right,
odd. But then they do have it on quality, trophy fisheries for panfish.
Right, like you would typically see where a 5-fish bag limit would be implemented on a lake that has a large size, like a size structure that's conducive to actually producing trophy fish, and you're trying to protect that resource, versus a lake that's like basically a stunted panfish lake that by doing that you're not encouraging growth of those fish. You're just encouraging more of the same. Right. Because you're not like you'd almost say, well, they should actually like increase the limit on a prior, right?
Absolutely.
To try to reduce that population down, to try to bolster the size structure, and then maybe go to like a 5-fish limit or something.
And I guess this kind of comes full circle back to exactly what Aaron was saying, is I just feel like there needs to be panels of field experts, whether it's from lake to lake, or if you're doing, generalized regulation, they have to have panels of field experts that come in.
Sure. Because like, to Aaron's point, it's like you hear a regulation change and you're not exactly sure why, and you're saying, well, tell me why, because somebody made that decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this panfish group that I keep hearing about, like, have you guys asked to be involved in that, or what's going? Like, how come you guys aren't there or represented in that, or trying to be involved in that, or what's going on with that?
Panfish group you're referencing.
Well, I keep hearing about it when we're talking about the Angling Buzz study, and like there's this it's the panfish group that is implementing these trophy bluegill lakes, and the ones that are pushing the
I don't know if they're pushing it or if it's the DNR. I think it's the DNR that.
Well, there was a group.
I'm not aware of it. I'm not even aware
when the bluegill thing happened. There was a group of guys that, or not just guys. It could have been guys and gals. I don't know, but there was a group of people that pushed for the bluegill thing, and I don't know necessarily if there's like a council or board or anything.
There is. I've heard about it from a dozen people. I feel like you guys should have heard about this.
What's it called? Do you remember?
Then you would know that we have not been asked to be a part of it or have our opinions heard on it.
But I wasn't necessarily, like, you heard how I worded it. I didn't say,
yes.
Yeah, I said, have you guys asked to be involved?
We have not.
No, we have not. We
and
would
I get
be interested. And
we
should look into it, but yeah.
If I lived there, I would have been there, and unless they said, no, we don't want you there. So that's why I'm just suggesting that you guys should be inserting yourselves in that.
I don't even know the name of this.
I don't either. That's what I'm saying.
Like, is that on us though, or is that like we didn't even really know this existed? This panel.
I'd say it's on you to a degree, because it's been referenced that it's this like in the Angling Buzz video, Jeremy mentions it's not Lindner or Angling Buzz, it's this panfish research group. He talks about it in the Angling Buzz video. They mention it several times. That is, I'm assuming it's a collection of stakeholders that the DNR has gathered together to have these discussions, and they've had multiple roundtable type discussions. And I couldn't tell you if it's 15 people or 50 people, but I think that you guys would be probably allowed to be involved, because I think that they probably have recruited half, and the other, I'm guessing, but I'm just imagining that they've recruited half and the other half have tried to insert themselves or whatever. But from how they've responded to my criticism, it's pretty clear that they just want to get this right, because whether it's talking to people on the Lindner and Angling Buzz side of things, or talking to people on the Minnesota DNR side of things, nobody's annoyed with anything that I've done, and everybody is just trying to get as much information as they can. So that's where I think that you guys,
we should get involved. Absolutely.
We'll have to reach out and look into it, because full honesty, like none of us, I think, can honestly say that we're even aware of what that group is called.
Is that something you'd ever get involved in, Aaron? Because like you said, you're as closest to the cities as you are to northern Manitoba.
I would absolutely. It's just like, I'm fighting the municipal government on something right now, the provincial government on something right now, the federal government on something right now, and
seems slightly busy.
Will you take on those projects in Manitoba before you would come down and be a part of a research team in Minnesota, or would you ever consider balancing them both? Be like, if the Minnesota DNR reached out and be like, hey, we want to do the study again, we're bringing the Linders, we're bringing this panel of people, we'd like to bring you in as well. Would you be like,
sure.
I'll drive down there?
And I did, Sam, I talked to the Minnesota DNR and passed on everything I could pass on, like had an hour plus conversation with people there and had an hour plus conversation with people on the Angling Buzz side of things. So I feel like I already sort of passed on as much as I can, that if somebody wanted me to come be a part of that in addition, I would, but I already feel like I've passed on some insights, and yeah, I would want to come though. Definitely. Like I would be up for it, but I also,
Passing on is passing on. In person, though, that's where I feel like you could be, you could have your eye on the ball.
yeah, I mean, yeah. Like,
That'd be cool.
I'm not saying no. Hey, what's the limit on bluegill? Not on the trophy lakes, but just other, is it 20 or 25 or something?
Yeah, I
think it's
believe
like 20.
bluegill's 20. Yeah.
20, I think. It's 20 and 10, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
That's intense. That is kind of intense. It's a lot.
What's
of bluegill.
10? Crappie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here's what I think it should be. I think it should be 20, because you guys are saying there's lots of lakes that are stunted, but there should be, especially for the lakes that they want to manage as trophy lakes, you're allowed to keep one bluegill over, and then you decide what the trophy size is. And the importance of one is that it allows you to selective harvest if you have a fish that dies while you're fishing. And the moment that you keep that fish, you're done for the day. So because you always have to be having an open spot in your limit to be fishing. The same way, like when you guys are at whatever lake there, I don't think it makes sense to catch your 10 and then continue catching and releasing for the rest of the day. I think you always need to have open spots in your limit, so that if you get a deeply hooked fish, it's not like, oh, well, we've already caught our fish, or we've already caught as many as we want for supper. You can look at it and you can be like, I need to keep this fish.
I'm pretty sure that's in general the law, because like even it isn't, Will, because I was going to say, I think with like for example, I mean, it's a bass tournament, it's catch and release, but like the limit is 6.
Yeah.
Say I were to fish 6 fish tournament, like the Denny's or St. Jude or something by myself, I can't, because when I get to 6, I'm not allowed to call.
Well,
Like, I'm
that's
not allowed
because
to go
that's
anymore.
because the state limit is 5, not because you couldn't keep fishing. Like the Minnesota fishing regulations don't say once you've caught 5 bass for the day and they're in your live well, you can't fish anymore. That's not in the regulations at all. Like you under the current, but under the current regulations, you could go catch 5 bass and then catch 500 bass the rest of the day and just let them all go. And that would
but that's still within under your limit if the limit is 6. I don't know. Could you?
No. I'm saying the statewide limit is 5. Say I go and catch 5, I put them all in my live well.
Is the statewide limit 5 or 6?
I'm pretty sure it's 5. I'm pretty sure it's 5.
I understand what you're saying.
Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
No, but that I feel like that does matter though, because like
in a hypothetical, in my hypothetical Minnesota, the limit is 5. I go out and I catch 5 bass and I harvest them all in my live well. I bled them out. They're all dead.
Sure.
Under the current regulations, it would still be legal for me to continue fishing for the day and catch as many bass as I want, as long as I release them.
Okay.
But what Aaron's saying is, if I have 4 and they're all dead in my live well, I can continue fishing as long as I don't keep the 5th one. Once I've kept the 5th one, I'm done for the day. I cannot fish anymore.
So we'll use
hatchery
steelhead as an example. So here you can keep the hatchery steelhead, and it's 3. The limit is 3 per person. So once you hit 3, you have to stop fishing. So if somebody is at 2 and they catch a 3rd, they have to decide, do I want to be done fishing for the day, or do I let this fish go and keep fishing? That's how it's set up here, which I think is a good thing.
So that way with your trophy bluegill lakes is, if somebody's thinking, oh, well,
it's 6.
Yeah, it's 6. And that's a major point, because I don't think you can keep. That's why, like, you have to immediately cull if you catch your 6th fish in a bass tournament in general.
Oh, okay. I guess that, yes. For
so it is like that.
That was just a sticking point. I was like, I know it's 6.
Yeah.
Anyways, continue.
If you want to have a bluegill lake where everybody releases all the big bluegills, you're still discouraging them from doing that, because if they want to just roll up and they catch a 9-inch bluegill, if they want to keep that 9-inch bluegill, they're done for the day. So it's still going to incentivize them to release most of the big bluegills that they catch, but it leaves them the opportunity that if they kill one incidentally, They can keep it at any point, and then they just have to check themselves out. And most people are going to look the other way, or not. I shouldn't say most people. Some people might push the limit, but regulation is totally involved, is totally dependent on the honor system anyways. There's not like COs waiting at the ramp and around every corner, right? We have to police ourselves anyways. But right off the bat there, you keep the high limit on all those lakes because you want to harvest a lot of them, but you've got that rule that you can only keep one over a certain size. The reason that the panfish limit bothers me here is everything that I've been talking about in the last couple of videos, and the whole thing that Jeremy Smith brought in about like catch your limit and go home, selective harvest, right? With the deep water, we're believing that barotrauma is a big deal. So keep your fish and just stop fishing, and then no harm is done, right? No matter what size they are, whether big, small, you just keep your limit and go home. Well, we can't do stuff like that here in Manitoba. And anywhere there's a red zone, you are robbed of the opportunity to properly do selective harvest, because if you catch a walleye in that red zone, or do you guys call it red zone in Minnesota?
No, what do you mean
No.
by red zone? And then reiterate what the limit is on crappies in Manitoba.
So red zone is when there's a bulk of fish, or a big range of fish that you can't keep. And I was looking at your guys' regulations recently, and I saw that you
We
really
have
only
like the northeast zone up by that would be up by Ely and stuff, the up there. But other than that, there's not a lot of zones.
but there is walleye measurements in some areas. There's pike in some areas.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
trout.
we have like slot limits in some
Yeah.
places, and
So the
and like
slot
length restrictions. Yeah,
is the slot what you keep or what you can't keep?
That varies a lot.
it
Lake to lake.
varies. Yeah,
No,
Like
but
on Mille Lacs,
No,
you-
the
like, and
expression slot, is that what you keep or what you don't keep when you say the slot?
it would be what you don't keep.
Okay,
no,
so that's
but no, the slot is what you keep if it's inside the
okay, well,
slot.
then the red zone's the opposite of the
But
slot.
it varies everywhere. Like it
Yeah.
depends where you are. Like if you
Right.
like, no, I'm
Well,
saying like the terminology of slot varies where you are.
Sure, like Mille Lacs Lake, I think you can keep one fish in the slot from 21 to 23. Is that true? Maybe it's somewhere just like that. So you basically have to keep a 21 to 23 inch fish. Where like a red lake walleye, you can keep 4 fish, 3 of them 17 or under, and then you get one that's over.
Okay, so in Red Lake, what you just described, there's no red zone. In Mille Lacs, is there anything stopping you from keeping one over 23?
Yeah, you
Yeah, you
can't. You
can't.
can only keep one walleye 21 to 23.
Okay, so
and then,
over
and then
23 is the
potentially
red zone.
one over 30. Or maybe
Over
that's not
23 is the red zone from what you're describing.
Okay.
So we,
And-
we don't have that terminology, but it functions the same way.
And then do you have lakes where under 21 would be a red zone too? Like, do you have a red zone here and here? Or is it mainly just...
I don't know. Red zone is just talking about what you can't keep. It's pretty
Sure.
simple. And
Okay.
what you're describing for Mille Lacs or whatever for walleye, I think that the red zone should be you're only allowed to keep 1 over 21. But and the idea is still the same, where you don't want people keeping those larger fish, but at least if somebody has a 27-inch walleye die in their hands, they're not just throwing it back, because how do we defend that 5 years from now with catch and release fishing, or 10 years from now? At a certain
Sure.
point, that doesn't work. When you guys were asking about bass fishing, the whole sport of bass fishing, it'll eventually catch up with us, because it's just catch and release. There's not enough harvest involved. You know, like it's a tough thing. Like, you know, we have it a lot better here in the Midwest when we're talking about crappies and stuff that we're eating, because it's a lot more justified. And, you know,
I don't know, but I don't know if it won't catch up with it, because I feel like there's some wicked delayed mortality in tournament bass fishing, even at a local level to a pro level. And I think that's what potentially keeps the bass fisheries in
but not nearly at a level that it would be if
Harvest.
people were keeping daily limits of them.
Sure.
You know,
But yeah,
What are you saying, Sam? There's wicked delayed mortality. So what's your point, or what are you getting at?
but I think you're saying like bass fishing will it'll catch up with us because not many people are harvesting bass. I think that's what you're saying. But I think plenty of bass are still probably dying just from tournaments in general.
If the sport of bass fishing continues on with trying to lean into catch and release, that is going to be indefensible at a certain point. And you guys have it amazing on Crappie Chronicles with Ryan. With, I don't know, is every episode have the huge cooking segment, or not necessarily? Some have it and some don't.
not every single one, but a lot of them.
There's a big emphasis, and that's like that's what we need moving forward, because it's the tradition, and it's also justifying being out there. I'm still okay with 99% catch and release, but the harvest aspect is so important. Sam, we were talking about this the other day
Yeah.
too. The harvest aspect it's so important, whether you're doing it 1% of the time or you're doing it 100% of the time. You have to lean into that and make it like a big part of it. Like when you get that fish that dies in your hands, finding something to do with it, like making use of it, and not just like, oh, okay, well, we'll just, toss this back and we don't really have an answer for this one, because that's a tough position to be in, like it just doesn't look good for the sport of fishing.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, and that's something we we kind of leaned into with, Ryan obviously being a very good cook, but with that is like, we wanted to talk about, like, for a long time, we went from people filling buckets to then catch and release. Like there was no middle ground. You know what I mean? So like we went to, it's like, well, yes, catch and release, like we want to do that, but like selective harvest, like we've talked about, is so important because like you need, to be honest, like you need it to make lakes better too. Fish grow more, like you got to pull some out, they spawn, that's kind of the way it goes. You do it the right way, you do it, ethically, you use the fish. It's a great way to do it. And yeah, Ryan's been killing it with that. So it's been a very good addition to everything.
It's definitely a great feature to have on there. Hey, Will, when you said how the regulations worked with stocked fish, that sounded awesome, especially how you have to stop fishing once you fill your limit. But what about with wild fish? If you have a wild fish die in your hands, like, is there no limit on wild fish?
So you can't keep them at all.
So what happens if one dies? You're just supposed to look the other way, kind of?
Have to kind of, yeah, you can't keep it. You cannot retain it.
Do you think it would work if you were allowed to keep one? Because people would still be reluctant because their day's over. Like nobody's going to want to just go out and keep one in the first 3 hours. But if they decide to keep one at the end of the day, would that work? And let me finish. If that doesn't work, what about, like, if we're saying that's too many because people are capitalizing on that, well, we could expand it, and it could be one per week, one per month, one per year. You could still find a way to make it where people were restricted from consciously keeping wild fish all the time.
Yeah, I think that could work if it was an annual harvest or something like that. Steelhead are tricky, mostly because it's such a system to system basis. Like Clearwater River steelhead are much different than a coastal river in Oregon or in Washington or wherever. But yeah, by the law, if you have a wild fish that is dead in your hands, you still have to let it go. You cannot retain it no matter what. So yeah, I don't think that would be the craziest thing to have some sort of annual limit, something like that.
Just question, and not that you have the answer, but do you think that some of that regulation where they're saying like all wild fish must be released whether they die or not is, because I think it's more of like a discussion with like salmon versus steelhead, but I think the thought process is the same, is that like these wild fish, all like when a wild fish dies, they want to retain all the nutrients that are native to that river system. And is that part of that? You think that, so like in like lakes in Minnesota, right? It's not like we're required to, like, when you keep fish, you just keep the fish, right? The fish, whether they live, die, whatever, a lot, whether they're stocked or not, doesn't matter. But in, a lot of the coastal rivers, like where these salmon, steelhead potentially, salmon, when they do spawn and die, the steelhead don't, but like when those fish do die, the nutrient, I've heard that discussion previously, that was such a key point to these type of fisheries, was that all of the nutrients that were like part of that ecosystem, if you will, were to be like retained. And I'm just curious if that's part of the decision making for limits like that versus like how a lake sets up, where maybe that's not a consideration. I don't know.
Sure. I think you could look at like the Kenai River is a good example because they get 4 of the 5 Pacific salmon species that come back there. They get millions of sockeye that come back, and they have a great trout population there. And all of that is based on the salmon, the
Mhm.
spawning salmon, the trout eat the eggs. And then once the salmon die, they're eating the carcasses. But also too, and not to divert this too much, but the crazy thing about the Kenai is, well, I think it's sort of crazy, is they have these escapement goals. Let's just use sockeye as an example. They have a goal, a measure that they put in, the state does, and let's just say that it's the lower end of the escapement goal is 3 million sockeye. And let's say the high end of the escapement goal is 5 million. Okay, so they have this range. Well, the commercial fishing, and not to turn it into an argument against commercial fishing, but their whole thing is that they do not want to exceed outside of this goal, because if there's too many salmon in the river, it's going to hurt the population, right? So they want to be within this goal that's set. So that's why they need to commercial fish, is that they don't want to let the escapement goal, they don't want to exceed it, which I think is sort of crazy, because before we had commercial fishing, or they had sonar counters, that's how they count all these fish. I think the salmon populations did just fine prior to humans, or when it was just native Alaskans there. So they've sort of put in these measures that there could be too many salmon in the river, and that it could, somehow, I don't know, harm the spawning grounds or whatever, which maybe to a point, if there's so many sockeye, in there, that maybe it could. But I think it's sort of a crazy metric that we're setting, because these fish have done fine for thousands and thousands of years before.
Almost like a potential made up narrative to allow commercial fishing. You're not saying that, but
I'm not saying that, but in a sense, I think it's sort of crazy to think that there could be a point where there's too many salmon. I don't know if that honestly exists.
Is the too many salmon? I mean, maybe we're getting too sidetracked here, but like the too many salmon thing. Yeah, because it's like that's a little different, because you're managing a population of fish that just die. Like, I don't know.
Right, they die. But the thing is that you can't kill them before they spawn. That's the big thing. Is like,
right.
Not talking sockeye, but like king salmon on the Kenai have been that there's not even really a fishery anymore. It wasn't even open last season. And now we're talking about, maybe a dying stock of fish that was once the biggest king salmon in the world, but that's not really the point here. But
that sparks an idea, just because like the word wild fish or stocked fish gets used so much in the trout community, but like that's not used that much in the walleye community, or even just standard freshwater fish. And that's why I had a question for Aaron about Canada. Like, there's a huge portion of lakes in Minnesota or the Midwest where it is just basically all stocked walleye.
Yeah,
we're the walleye.
We're the state of walleye. We're the state of stocked walleyes.
They don't naturally reproduce. My whole area, basically, there's very few naturally reproducing walleye lakes, but we stock the heck out of them. And just because I think it's for the tradition, or just, I don't know exactly. Is there a lot of lakes in Manitoba you think that they stock walleyes that they wouldn't naturally reproduce?
So the lakes you're talking about, lakes that never had walleyes before, and they just are stocking them like a stock trout lake, basically?
100%.
They just put them wherever they want there to be walleyes.
That makes up a large majority of the metro or South Metro, 100%.
Yeah, that's been my life. There's walleyes in all our lakes, because most of them are stocked. Yeah, because I mean, naturally, there's not.
I don't even know.
Not that many.
Well, I don't even know what.
Sam, it's funny because on that topic, like, I've always heard about how tough it is to get walleye to spawn in lakes and how they'll make man-made reefs and stuff. Walleye spawned in my parents' pond.
Successfully.
Yes. What do you mean successfully? Yeah, there was baby walleye.
Like there were more of them.
It wasn't
there were more.
Fish sex. They actually had baby walleye. Yes. Is that not crazy?
And there's no current. There's nothing that flows into there.
You've seen my parents' pond. Like, for the rest of you that haven't seen, I know Sam's fished on my parents' pond, but it's like 2/3 of an acre. It's a clay dugout. It's like, wow. Like it's a little pond. And back in the day when I was a child stocking this pond, like, rock bass spawned in there, obviously, but crappie spawned in there, pike spawned in there, walleye spawned in there. Like, everything that I put in there spawned in there. And it's just so bizarre to me that walleye won't spawn in these other lakes that are like 100 acres, and they're putting man-made structure and stuff in them, and they won't spawn for some reason. That's crazy to me.
And maybe they do more than we think. I think that's just something I truly believe, but maybe they do a lot more than I think.
They must not. They have a good idea on recruitment with these things, and I'm
yeah, they're putting it. I mean, you can look through the one thing Minnesota does have great is like the DNR lake finder and all the stuff, because you can like easily access all the information of when they stock places and stuff. But you can look through so many lakes that have walleyes in them, especially in southern Minnesota, and it's just getting pumped with walleyes all the time. And you're like, where? And then like you go there to walleye,
and then no
fish,
one
and you're
catches
like,
them
where,
ever.
where are the walleyes?
Hey, Ryan, I understand your mindset kind of explanation there with the wild fish, but I'm pretty sure that where Will's fishing, the wild fish are just protected so much because it's so sensitive. I don't think it's the idea is we want to keep the biomass balanced out or something like that. I don't think that's involved in the thinking. They're just like,
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just,
the thing about it is like, if those wild steelhead were being released at a rate that was virtually 100%, then it would be okay. It makes sense. But as soon as it's not like that, like for example, muskies, for the most part over the years, you'd think that they're releasing at an extremely high percent. So it's like, okay, it just makes sense to have a zero limit because you can't really trust anglers to self-regulate and release 99.9% of the muskies. But now what's come up, like starting, I don't know, was it 5 years ago or 10 years ago, where the warm water, like on social media, you just hear about people with this 80-degree musky water and going to lakes and seeing muskies floating all over the place in the summertime. Suddenly it's like two things need to happen. We need to have a regulation, I feel like, that allows some muskie to be kept if that many are dying anyways. And then we need education with self-policing to catch up, where people are just not musky fishing when the water's that warm. And if you were to combine those two things, like more regulation and more education, we'd be managing those fisheries way better, because just letting people go fish them but not keep them, and people being oblivious to the fact that there's a high mortality rate while they're doing those practices, that doesn't work. Like that's like a Neanderthal way of doing things that isn't going to be defensible 5 and 10 years from now, which is kind of where I was saying about bass fishing. And you guys were talking about bass fishing. I think, Sam, you were asking about bass fishing near the start of this conversation about like how that fits with my belief system and bass being beat up in live wells and carried around the lake and stuff. I don't think that's defensible that much longer. Like the bass fishing industry needs to tighten that up. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, to your point about the muskie thing, right? So like having regulation that allows for that. Like if, you have a fish that does die, right?
Yeah.
That you can use that fish. Like you don't just have to let it waste, right?
Yep.
So like in a lot of places now, especially because of how heavily like muskies have been under the microscope for like conservation efforts and things like that, like a lot of places go to like a 50-inch size limit. You know what I mean? And so, say you're talking about this, you want to implement something like that. I don't know that you can have, that same type of regulation. Cause then you say, okay, well, I'm out there and I catch a 44-incher and it dies in the net because it fought to exhaustion or it was mishandled or whatever. You're still in a spot where even if the regulation was, you can keep a fish, but if the size limit is still a 50-inch fish, you're still not able to retain a fish undersize.
No red zone. I'm not in favor of any red zone. The 50 plus is a red zone. So everything over 50 is what I would call a red zone. And I'm not in favor of any sort of red zone like that, because having one muskie you can keep, it still satisfies whatever they're trying to do with the 1 over 50. I think what they're trying to do is allow somebody to keep a trophy if they mindfully want to. Right. But I think what would be better than that, like people shouldn't be keeping a 50 plus for the wall unless it's bleeding and can't be released. Like there's no room anymore for keeping a fish like that for no reason when replicas are so good and stuff. Like it just doesn't make sense to keep a healthy fish. That's just goofy to me.
Yeah. And I agree with you there. I'm just saying, like, I don't think you can have both, right? Like, but I think there should be room for things like that, where it's like, I caught this fish, it died, but because it's undersized, I can't even utilize the fish for any, like, I can't say I'm just going to take it home and use the meat or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like that the temperature would be so hard to regulate too with the muskie deal. Obviously, like,
wouldn't muskies be one of the easiest things?
I think he's saying more self-policing there.
Yeah, sure. Are you saying self-policing or are you saying regulation?
like I was saying, both. Like, first of all, regulation has to allow for keeping one, and then self-policing and increasing education is that people know to release them. And I feel like the muskie community is actually one that's really good because don't most people who buy muskie baits and muskie rods and fish for muskies already like preach and practice 99% release anyways?
Yeah, I think the muskie community is one that's like very much up to date on that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So let me just play devil's advocate and just like talk about water temperature in general. So like, say you're on Lake of the Woods and they've come to find that the threshold is 83 degrees. You should not be muskie fishing in 83 degrees. Like, how far down does 83 degrees go? And maybe that's something for further science experiments, but like, you guys have all been swimming. The top foot or two is much hotter than it is, in a deep basin. And what if I'm throwing big rubber in a deep basin and it's 80 degrees down there in the basin, or 76 or 75, but at the surface level where my boat's reading, it's 83.6. So it's like, is it really 83.6 all the way down? Probably not, right?
Does this not sound exactly like how Will, stop yawning or cover that mouth of yours? Doesn't that sound exactly like the how deep is too deep for the crappies thing?
It kind of does, but also
regulate. I'm not going to tell somebody who has one muskie trip a year booked and it's always this date and it's the only time their grandpa can come down that they shouldn't be going out muskie fishing because the water temperature is a certain temperature. But if you're a guy that goes muskie fishing like 100 days of the year and you're a freaking deadly assassin, I would hope that at a certain point, that you can dial it back your efforts for these 2 weeks of the year.
Totally. And I'm saying that too. I'm just saying in general, regulation of water temperature just seems so.
I wasn't talking about regulation of water temperature, just like not regulation of water depth for barotrauma stuff. I think regulation needs to just allow for keeping one. And it's same with the regulation and what we were talking about with the bluegill thing, where the regulation does have some strictness to it. Because once you catch that one trophy bluegill, you're done for the day. And what they might find with either the wild steelhead example that we were talking about with Will or with the muskie thing, if people were harvesting too many muskies, then that isn't going to be one muskie a day. That needs to be one muskie for the year. And what that means is if you have mindfully and ethically and legally harvested a muskie, you're done for the year. And I don't think that's a problem to be done for the year when something as valuable as a muskie, right? Because fishing is a privilege. It's not a right. I don't think anyways, it's a privilege to be able to go do it. And we need to act and behave like it's a privilege and act responsibly with what we're doing out there. So it would be nice if one muskie a day was allowed, because it allows you to accidentally kill one today and accidentally kill one tomorrow, and then maybe not accidentally kill one for the next 10 years. But if people are choosing to harvest too many or accidentally killing too many, well, then maybe we need to make it that you can only kill one every month or one every year or whatever it is, but we need to find a way to sustainably manage it. So that's where regulation can get stricter with not just one a day, but I don't think it needs to be at a point where it's talking about water depth and situations like that.
Right. But it does need to get away from like the greed of just being like, I just want to fish and do whatever I want to do. Because like to your point, like say you were going to implement, like you have a muskie tag, whatever for the year, you kill one, you're that's it. You've filled your tag. You can no longer fish for muskies this year.
Yep.
Which maybe is reasonable to some people. Maybe some people would say that's the most outrageous thing I ever heard, So it's like, but to your point, there needs to be people making these decisions that are informed, not just people emotionally being like, I don't like that. I don't think that's what it should be.
Oh, for sure. So I'll just add to this. Do we have, or Aaron, do you have anything else you want to talk about in conservation? Because otherwise I'm sure we do have a couple other questions just in general about Uncut over the years.
I don't want to talk about that. Let's keep talking about conservation. This is so exciting. But I think I already said this, but imagine everything we're talking about with like the selective harvest and the Barotrauma with the crappies, and suddenly in Manitoba, you're not allowed to keep one over 13¾ inches. Like, it's not just the wild steelhead that Will says has a pretty high success release rate and muskies that have a pretty high success rate. We're talking about something like a crappie that the DNR just said that 76% of them die when you're fishing in deeper than 28 feet of water. Like, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but like, it's like they're implying that the mortality rate might be that high. And meanwhile, over here, we're not even allowed to harvest one over that size length. So it's like, we got to get that figured out. But anyways, we can move on from conservation if you want.
Well, no, it's up to you, but I feel like, this has been a great talk on that. And if the guys have anything else they want to add there, otherwise, I have
a way to ask your question.
Yeah.
I have a way to ask your question, Adam, and keep it with conservation.
Okay. I don't know if you know what my question is, but okay.
It might be this. How far are you willing to go with this, Aaron? And how far are you going to continue with this? Is this, are you going to continue conservation type studies with fishing across the board? Like, will you do more and more of these?
Like the videos and all that sort of stuff?
Or more studies?
I've got 2 or 3 more episodes to do, topics that I like, relevant topics, like kind of like where I started with this. I was already kind of like envisioning like 4 or 5 videos kind of thing. And then beyond that, it's just ongoing stuff that I think we're all going to work on in terms of just increasing our awareness and efforts with these types of things. But how far am I willing to go with pushing some of the conservation and regulation stuff? I'm going to do a bunch of stuff that's outside of just uncut angling and videos. You know what I mean? Like in terms of lobbying with the government and stuff.
Cool.
Oh, that's sweet. That was not my question, so you didn't get it.
All right, hit it.
All right. Yeah, no, mine has way more just in general to do with fishing. But I feel like we can't have you on and not ask, since we do avidly crappie fish so much. The plan for your hammering 16-inch crappie video, were you just like, yeah, I'm gonna, like, I just found this deer and I'm gonna go do it? Or like, how did that come about? Because I think it's one of the most infamous ice fishing videos of maybe ever. And it's still to this day one of the coolest things to just go watch. It's awesome.
Famous or infamous? Or both?
Both. Like infamous in good sense. Like it's like everybody knows that video. Like it's unreal. But
Thank you, by the way. But I think it's more just along the lines of, like, as you guys know, when the crappies are schooled up like that, they're going to eat kind of anything. So you suddenly have the opportunity to just do whatever.
Were you heading to the lake planning on, like, all right, I'm going to catch them doing, this, drop this spoon down, whatever, have some fun, film a good video. And then you saw a deer and you were like, this is going to be awesome.
Clearly it was mindful that I wanted to do it.
That's what I wanted to
hear. Like I'm saying, they're going to eat anything. So it's like, I always call it, like, I call it stick handling. You know what I mean? It's like stick handling on an empty net. Like you could just score. And that's like everything we do out there with fishing and media stuff. It's like, we're so good at what we do. Like we also get skunked all the time. I'm talking about all of us. We also get skunked all the time, but we're so good at what we do that when we get ourselves into a situation where we're going to get the video done, usually it's like stick handling on an empty net. You know what I mean? It's not like we're actually facing these adverse situations that would be like the equivalent of somebody in a high stakes bass tournament where it's like every bite is so freaking critical. It's like most of the time, we would have gotten it done easier if we weren't stick handling in front of the empty net. You know what I mean? There's a very famous goal that's determined so much in NHL history of somebody who has the puck bounce over his stick on an empty net. You guys familiar with this replay?
Yes.
It's an Edmonton Oiler maybe or something, or is it against the Edmonton Oilers?
I don't know the details of that, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Where it's like an empty net and the puck bounces over his stick. And I'm not saying that he was trying to be super fancy with it, but he could have literally just gone like this and just been like, ugh, and made sure it got in the empty net kind of thing. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's so much of what we do that's a little bit dramatized for effect or to make sure it's caught on a certain lure, a certain color or whatever else. And not trying to take the magic out of the whole thing, but you know what I'm talking about.
Adam's going to lay in bed at night, look up and be like, so he didn't find the deer on the way to the lake.
Which I didn't say, but I might have implied.
No, I had to know. I had to know with that.
Have you filmed a lot recently or fished that lake a lot recently over the years? And what has the size structure been like watching that lake? Have those fish gone down, up, gone through waves?
I was telling Adam this the other day, is like there's a handful of lakes from where I am terrainy that that kind of thing could happen on, like, and by a handful, probably like at least a dozen that I know of. Like not necessarily with that many 16s, but like certainly if you use the 15-inch number, where you could catch
right,
a
like
dozen
right
15
time,
inches.
right situation type
Yeah.
thing.
And the size structure question that you just asked is a really good question. And I think the size structure is more unique to that exact school and how, for whatever reason, that they were all schooled up like that, more so than that specific lake. Like, I think that if you were to be fishing that lake at other times in that period, it's not like you'd get a good sampling like that, right? Like, it is so weird how that works. And you guys have seen this too, where you're on a lake and you tap into it for whatever reason on a certain day, and it might not even be on a certain spot. It could be on different spots on the same lake, and it feels like there's just huge fish everywhere. And then it just doesn't represent like that on a bunch of other days, even within the same year.
Totally.
Like, speaking to what you're saying about size structure. So I don't know.
Well, that's that's like half of what we film with like the metro stuff. Like, if you were to sample the size structure of 95% of most of the lakes we fish, you'd be like, this place is not great. But then you're there, for the 1 or 2 days that are right, and you're like, why is there no 7 to 10 inchers? They're all 12 to 15. They're all huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's a super good point.
I fished that lake, Sam, like, once every couple years or whatever. Like, it's one of a handful of lakes that's in rotation, but it's not like it's necessarily the spot or lake or whatever like that. Like, it's, I think that kind of thing could happen again, or like, I'd have to review the video to even remember exactly how many, but I feel like I caught like 2016s that day. But at the same time, I don't remember exactly, but I thought I caught like 2016s that day. I don't know for sure, but like,
Wow.
I guess what I'm saying is I feel like I could catch 2016s on a handful of lakes or never do it again, because it's like, realistically, I think that if I were to say I caught 2016s that day, I think the most 16s I've ever seen is like 3 or 4 for the group in a day. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I've even seen anything close to that. I've seen 2015s in a day quite a few times, but usually if you get 116 in a day, that would be all you're going to see. You know what I mean? Like, the amount of days I've seen even 216s are so few, is I guess my point. I wasn't trying to say, to be clear, that usually you get 116 and that's it. Like, usually you don't get any 16s, to be clear, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And then with that too, like with some of your lake trout videos and stuff, and just, I know like the videos you put out, like you said earlier, you take breaks, and whether it's creatively or feels like every bite you film is just so incredible. Like, how long have you staked out a bite or film, like dedicated to filming a particular bite or video to get one done? Like, how, what you get what I'm saying? Like, have you been like, I want to film a lake trout video doing this, and I know it's going to take forever, but I'm going to dedicate this time? Like, what was that length of time, and maybe what video was it?
Nothing too crazy. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Come on.
It's not like camped out on a place for like a week or something, and you're like, I'll catch him doing this.
I don't have a really profound answer to that. Nothing comes to mind. Like,
multiple days, you would say, like a week. Like, you've dedicated like probably a week to put together a good lake trout video per se?
Not really. I haven't done a bunch of epic lake trout videos. Like, I have that one awesome eat, but like, compared to like all of Clayton's huge lake trout on video, I don't have a bunch of huge lake trout videos or anything. I only have like a couple noteworthy ones, maybe. I don't have a bunch. Like, I haven't logged crazy hours, honestly. I don't have a big catalog of trophy lake trout videos, Bart. I don't know.
I was just saying in general with species, like if there was one that you dedicated a lot of time to, that that felt like you really wanted to do it, like it was a personal passion type thing.
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fine.
The fishing's obviously like better up here, and it's like if I set my mind to doing something, I go give it an attempt, and if it doesn't work out in a couple days, it's more like I just kind of move on to the next thing and then take another stab at that another time. I don't ever just like go tirelessly try it for like 10 days until it works out, if that makes sense. So it's like even that the hammering 16-inch crappie thing, it's like I had been exploring a lot in that time frame and looking for stuff, but it's not like I was like, you know, filming everything that happened for a week and then finally got on the school. It was more like, you know, if I actually turned on the camera and tried filming for a couple days, and if it didn't happen, then I would have just tried the next thing. I wouldn't have been determined to get a specific trophy crappie piece in that window of time or anything.
Yeah. And I guess a follow-up question to that kind of in the same vein would be like, are there a lot of attempts or like videos that you never published that you filmed that just didn't go how you'd hope, so you just scrapped the whole thing?
Tons of them. And honestly, for the most part, it's because I lost motivation on it and not because it didn't come together. Because it's like, you know, I don't know how specifically artistic you guys are or how much you can relate with this, but like for a lot of stuff, you're like amping up on the idea and the design and stuff. And then right when it's time to do it, you start to lose a little bit of motivation potentially. And then it just doesn't happen, you know? And it's not like you even gave it a fair shot necessarily a lot of times, unfortunately. Like, I've got all sorts of efforts and trips and stuff where you get all psyched up to do it, and you guys can probably relate with this, and you do your big travel to get there, and by the time you get there, it's like day one, you're just like, okay, I got here, and I'm just like, now I'm just like too tired or exhausted to even do anything, you know what I mean? It's like you need the first couple days just to regroup, then all of a sudden you're halfway through the trip and you have nothing to show for, and you start spinning your wheels that way, and by the end of the trip, you didn't even give it a full honest effort, unfortunately. But it's just, it is tough out there. Like, I know you guys can relate. It is tough being out in the field and filming. And it's not even like going out and getting the goals are that hard in a week, but it's like just maintaining the momentum and energy and right chemicals for that amount of time. Maybe you guys can't relate. And I'm just like,
no,
you know,
I can fully relate
100%.
with the storytelling thing. Cause like I find myself like there's certain videos or like trips or whatever, like we get really excited and it's like, oh, we're gonna film it this way and do it, and then you get to whether it's partway through shooting or you get to the sitting down to editing it and you're like, man, yeah, this idea was great and it's gonna be really cool, but I'm really not, like, I am losing a lot of juice to actually accomplish this right now. So I feel that a ton. And like when you get somewhere and have that going down, I'm sure Pink can attest to this. Like when we went to Maine, like we go out there, Griff and I had driven 27 hours to get out there, and then Pink flies in like 2 days later with Waldo. We get them, and then like, you know, film the next 2 days, and you're like, hey, we have 3 more days, but at the same time you're like, I'm already ready to go home. I'm exhausted. Like, that's a real thing.
I think there's something to be said about almost like the juices and losing the juices. That's an interesting question I'd like to ask too, is like what's something that you filmed and maybe edited a long time after that? Like maybe the first 39 hours, did you edit a majority of that project?
Yeah, I edited all that.
Was that edited a long time after it happened, or did you start editing?
I
that
can't
pretty
imagine
quickly?
how many hours that took to edit.
I don't remember exactly how the editing all worked for that. I mean, it was just such an ongoing long grind. But Sam, I feel like I'm going to not quite answer your question, but I'm going to give you something that's going to be along the lines of something you're looking for, maybe. Have you guys all seen the video that I filmed with the YouTube play button where I caught some big pike?
Yeah.
Okay, so for filming that video, it was filmed at a lake called Clear Lake, which is in like one of our only national parks in Manitoba. And I knew how I wanted the video to go, and this is classic how making videos has gone for me, is I psych myself out so much because it's like I know how much needs to be done that it's like, okay, I can't even attempt this unless there's no wind and everything's awesome. And I get up super early and the stars align and everything's perfect. So for that video, I was hanging out at that lake for at least a week or more. But by the time I actually committed to opening the box and starting to screw into the lure, the whole video didn't even start getting filmed till like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And then everything happened exactly how the video shows, where I actually catch 2 trophy pike, like actual trophy pike that people would be happy with to catch in a whole season on a lake like that. Even though it's Canada, it's still tough to catch a 40+ inch pike. So everything happens after 2 or 3 o'clock in one day, but it took a week hanging out there to just not be psyching myself out. It's like day after day I'm launching. Then by the time I get over there, it's like, you drive around, you look at the weeds a bit. You're just like, the wind's a little too much, and you just talk yourself out of it. And that's the kind of creative block I've hit a million times, where I go on a trip and I drive around 3/4 of this province and never even start filming because I'm psyching myself out. And I just end up doing so much like doodling around and scouting, which is like highly beneficial to me in other ways over the years. Like I've seen so much just by like being on these wild goose chases all the time. But very rarely does the camera actually get pressed on and something doesn't either definitely happen or definitely not happen within a day or two. Like it's not like I just grind for a week until I finally get that bite. It's like either I get the motivation and find the bite that the stars are going to align on and get it done, or I just keep driving around and wasting time. That's more how my process goes. And it's not efficient at all. And I know Jay over the years has always said that it's better to get it done than not get it done or something. I don't know. He's got a bunch of expressions like that, but
it sounds very profound.
It sounds like Jay.
I think it's probably something that he's taking from like, what's that guy's name? What's the little Italian guy that's always doing the motivation?
Gary V.
Yeah, I think it's like a Gary V, like getting it done. Getting it, I don't even know. Wow, I really butchered presenting that one, but like, it's
Thanks, Jay.
The essence of it is like good enough. Like just get it done and move on to the next project. And I have a tough time getting that figured out, but there's different ways to get it done. And I feel like I'm in a better place in some senses than ever with that, because when I was pursuing this lagoon documentary, when you're filming real-time stuff, you're forcing yourself to always have the camera rolling and always be on, because like all of a sudden you're having a conversation with the police at your back door. There's not an opportunity to wait until the wind dies down and the sun's better to talk to the police when they're at your back door. So suddenly you're always on, the camera's always rolling. Right now, I've got a camera sitting here right now waiting and anticipating on certain phone calls that could come at any point that I'm going to want to be recording. So it's like right now I feel like I'm always on, and I'm, in a better place to film stuff if I want to film stuff. And when I filmed those last couple of videos, it was just like, hey, we just have to get this done now. So we're just going to go get this done. And usually it works out. I mean, it definitely helps that the fisheries are less pressured up here and stuff, and that I'm so good at everything I do helps too.
Is there a little bit different type of rush filming the lagoon documentary versus a fishing video per se? Or are you feeling the same type of vibes when you're filming the lagoon documentary that you are when you try to accomplish maybe say like a YouTube play button? Or is it totally different feelings?
I mean, none of it comes together until you're editing, right? Like, as in you're out filming, and I know you guys can relate. I don't know, Will, if you've edited, or Ryan, you've edited, but like, or have you guys edited?
Yeah,
Will,
a bit.
Will,
Not really.
Like, you don't know what you have so often. Like, you go out, Bart, and Sam, you can probably relate with this. Like, you think you got a good shoot, but you don't even want to be excited about it, and you don't really know exactly what you got. And then when you sit down and you kind of scrub through and check a couple things, and then you're just like, and you know what you got then.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, just to answer your question about like comparing one high to another for filming out of fishing or in fishing, with either one, I don't think you really have a vibe on exactly what you've got while you're doing it. It's like you sort of figure it out later and get excited about it later, because you don't even want to get excited about anything. Like, I've heard this one story that Jay told me about some TV show. Again, I'm going to butcher it by not knowing all the details, but some TV show that was up there and apparently didn't press record on like some legendary 50-pound lake trout. Like cameraman didn't press record, and it's just like, like, legendary fish, legendary moments, and didn't get it captured. So that's where you never really get excited until you get home and verify that everything went as good as you thought and that nothing's, no surprises.
Yeah, I know. I can feel that. And that's like, well, just thinking of that, that was like when we filmed our red video last March or last end of February. Like when I got home, I told Pink, like, I put it in a hard drive, and before I even looked at it, I backed it up on 3 others. And I finally looked at it and I was like, okay, it's as good as I thought it was. Now I can't tell anybody about it for 8 months. Fuck. But yeah, no, it's that same thing where you're just like, okay. Then when you know what you have, you're like, oh my God. And it's so stressful, but definitely. So when you brought up, Sobi brought up 39 hours, was that an idea you had stewing for like a long time? And then you were like, I just want to film some other type of competition, or like that, how did that come about? Or was that just like all of a sudden you're like, we're going to do this?
I mean, you're asking about something that happened 6 or 7 years ago, I think. But what I will say is that I believe it was inspired from Fly versus Jerk in Sweden. You guys familiar with that?
No.
So Fly versus Jerk in Sweden was like a well done competition, and it was all pike, and it was like basically one guy fishing with conventional methods versus a guy fishing with fly fishing methods. And the similarities is that it was like an extended competition over different days, different locations, and different boats competing against each other remotely. So a lot of similarities, and it was well done and entertaining, pretty entertaining. If you guys do look it up, it had like, it might be still going and had like 12 seasons or something. Like it's been going on for a long time.
Really? Okay.
And when I was watching it, I was like, this is pretty good, but like they're just fishing for pike nonstop. And the whole little dynamic of the fly fishing versus the conventional fishing is kind of like irrelevant, which they didn't put that much emphasis on that. It was like which team wins more than even though it's called Fly versus Jerk, it was just about which team had the biggest pike or the most pike type of thing by the end of the competition. So I guess I watched that and I thought, if this is interesting and it's just pike, let's make it every species. Like, cause I've always been like about multi-species approach. Yeah. So I watched that and I thought, like we could turn this up quite a bit by making it multi-species. But I know that it was inspired a lot from theirs, because also what they had in theirs is like the video check-ins where all 4 teams would kind of say what their score was at the end of the episode and stuff like that. So a lot of the framework was taken from that for sure.
That's cool.
So we don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but I'm gonna bring it up anyway. So like in that same line of like that type of competition thing, and like maybe like running out of gas to like do some of this stuff, like why was like the Game of Inches thing so much different?
Is that the question you want to ask, or what's the question?
Well, just like that, like, was that something that you just didn't like have it in like that teed up right to like put it all out there, or what?
Or did you just do really bad and you didn't want to edit it?
Okay,
or really good and you didn't want to show that?
So, and don't be using this as clickbait for this whole podcast.
I'm just genuinely curious.
Timestamp 2:47.
I'm willing to talk about this, but it's also like it's okay. Yeah, I'm willing to talk about
just
it.
Just as a viewer, I'm just curious.
So what happened with that essentially is that there was. I'm just thinking what I'm willing to say or not say. There was. Dynamics, we'll say business dynamics involving different people involved, we'll say, and the business dynamics were ongoing kind of like during and after and throughout the summer and unresolved. And I mean, I guess I definitely could have handled it better, I suppose. And I don't want to necessarily defend myself, but the one thing I will say is that at least 2 months, like in August, I can't remember if the videos went out in October or November, but in August, I told everybody involved, I'm not going to be involved unless certain things are resolved. And there was little effort to resolve them potentially. And my point in mentioning that isn't to defend myself as much as to say that it wasn't necessarily that much of a surprise by anyone when I wasn't involved. As in, there was stuff to figure out. And to be honest, most of it was probably on my end to figure out. And I wasn't really that concerned with figuring it out because I got distracted with politics and stuff. So it was like, you know, I wasn't present for conversations that I should have been present for. But I did say, hey, if this doesn't get figured out, I'm indifferent. I'm not going to be involved in this. So the only thing I'll say about that is it wasn't a surprise to anyone involved that I wasn't involved, but I should have personally made more effort to resolve things and get it figured out. And I was distracted with other stuff. So I was sort of indifferent. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your questions or not.
It does. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Behind the scene logistics.
I was trying to be vague, obviously, while still give you some details on it. So it's like,
I get it. Yeah.
100% I could have handled it better, should have handled it better. Better communication by me could have fixed everything. But I just want to say that, like, these are all my friends and they knew a couple months in advance that I wasn't likely going to be involved. They didn't find out when you know, a minute before.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's still shitty of me for sure, but it's not like it was a surprise, you know, a minute before or something like that.
I think we were just more curious, like, if you had participated in like film stuff that just never got put out, or if it was.
Yeah. I filmed the whole thing. I just like I'm distracted with a bunch of stuff in life and got distracted more with like politics and stuff that year that like it became such a distant priority to me, which is a lame excuse, but it was like, you know, there was some business stuff that I wasn't happy with. And I was not willing to sit down at my computer for a month unless conditions were perfect. And that's a lame excuse, but that's kind of where it was at. So
Oh, it makes sense.
All right. Yeah,
I told everyone when I said I'm not likely going to do it that I intend to make it up to you in time. And I, you know, aim to do that. I mean, and have worked on making it up to each person kind of thing. And yeah, will in time. You know, after the 39 hours, there was a lot of frustration of dealing with human beings where I didn't like after the first one, I did not want to do any more just because it was like chasing people around and dealing with humans is like the hardest thing to deal with. And especially for someone who's not, that's not my strong suit. So like, I didn't want to be doing the logistics of dealing with people. So that's why for season 2, Jay said, well, I'll handle all that and do all the coordination. And then, you know, Jay meant well by it. And Jay did a ton of logistics, but in the end, I had to do a bunch of stuff that I didn't want to do and manage a bunch of stuff that I didn't want to be involved in. So then after doing season 2, again, I was like, I don't want to be doing this again. So we did Game of Inches, and it's, you know, obviously there's similarities to 39 hours, but I was, you know, wanting to do it. And I guess I just shouldn't have done it if I had reservations, I suppose. You know what I mean? Because it's
yeah, for sure.
Logistically, it's just clumsy and tricky. And
I can't even imagine like choreographing that to have it make any sense on the back end, honestly.
Well, you know what really sucks about it is, for the first 2, I really felt like most of the people involved came in with the mindset of, we're all going to do this and rally together and get something awesome done. And by the end of it, it was just like, it wasn't like that at all. Like the Conrads are the only ones that were just 1,000,000% in always with all these things. The Conrads are like, we're going to do it. Like, we don't care what's involved for money, logistics, schedules. We will just make it work. And true to their word, they just gave it 1,000,000% with all 3 seasons. They were just like so easy to work with. And I felt ripped off by different people through different seasons and different situations. But then in the end, I'm the one that didn't follow through and go all in with the game of inches thing. So it's really shitty of me in that sense, especially because I was so frustrated with other people that then for game of inches, when I was frustrated with things and I was just like, well, if this isn't going perfectly for me, well, then I'm not going to give it 100% and whatever. So it is pretty lame how that all came full circle, but yeah, that's kind of what happened.
I think there's some relatability there, especially with you guys, Bart and Ryan and stuff, because you guys throughout the seasons you've done it, and obviously you're not coordinating with people across different provinces, but you guys have ran into a lot of different hurdles and stuff of just dealing with 4 people.
I just think anytime there's a group dynamic, there's always some of that, right? Like it's just hard to get everyone's mind in the same spot, no matter what project you're doing, you know?
Yeah.
But
yeah, there's constantly someone's really motivated, someone's very not motivated, or whatever's going on. And especially like, we're dealing with it through a whole ice season. There's
but again,
ebbs
it's
and flows
like
and you
your
get
friends
exhausting.
too.
But and
You
it's
know,
your friends.
It's
so
not just
yeah.
like a business thing. So it's like you're doing it with your buddies, which is I get that, so.
Some of these projects, like for your guys' stuff or for these different seasons of 3 hours and stuff, is they cover such a wide span of seasons of life that when there's that many people involved, different people are going through crazy stuff and have different considerations going on. I know, like, in that time period, I went through crazy relationship stuff, and in a different season or a different episode series, another person went through crazy relationship or whatever dynamics. And I know another thing is, like, when we first started this, very few of the people had any major business sponsor dynamics to balance. And then by the end of it, as everybody's expanding their portfolio, suddenly everyone has all these different deals to try and balance. And it's like, everyone's saying, well, we're just committed to making this work no matter what. But then at the end of the day, it needs to be perfect for everyone to do it properly. And then everyone's always kind of wanting it to be adjusted to what suits them. And it can be really tricky. It can definitely be really tricky. So, it's probably why things like that involving so many different people are rare to see accomplished, because balancing that many people's personalities and sponsor affiliations and just all these things is really tricky to do.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, I have two questions. These are off the wall, totally different from what we were talking about. This relates to the podcast you did before this, and remind me of those guys' names and their podcast, because we got to give them a shout out.
Brett and Dan, and it's the Sporting Journal Radio.
Okay.
Yeah, Brett and Dan. I'm pretty sure I have their names right. Brett with 1 T. Amundsen. Brett Amundsen and Dan Amundsen. Sporting Journal Radio on YouTube and wherever else. Yeah.
And one thing that was brought up there, and I don't know who brought it up, but from some segments in that podcast, I took away that whether it was all you guys or it was just you thought that forward-facing sonar didn't affect the fish that much, or they don't feel it that much. And that's something I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's a lack of pressure up there, but from what you've seen, just being in the field, do you think it affects them, or they feel it that much, or they don't?
I know what you're implying, because maybe the fish are dumber or something. But what I will say is, like, people up here strongly feel it does affect them. So it's not like I'm representing the people up here thinking that it doesn't affect them. I don't think it affects them nearly as much as people say. I do think and know that the fish are aware of it, because you see, like, a burbot or a pike coming up into the hole and, like, drinking the transducer type thing. So obviously it can feel something going on there.
Yeah.
But I don't think that people's observations when they're seeing a fish move away from the transducer or whatever, I don't feel like that's often being observed properly. And that's me counteracting opinions of people up here, because that's who I talk to. I don't talk to people in Minnesota nearly as much as I talk to people from up here. So I'm talking about the same fish, like, as in the sample size is the same in the discussions. So I can't talk. If you're saying that you're convinced that it matters there, I guess I probably can't have the conversation with you guys, because I'm not fishing the same fish you are.
Yeah, I would just say on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So where we are is definitely the most pressured place in the ice belt is, within Minneapolis area. And with more and more people getting live sonar, it is definitely something that we have noticed and seen where it depends on the day. There's some days that they don't care. But largely, if you're on certain lakes, like you can turn it in forward and you will watch them hit a wall or they will start moving. And I'm not saying like you turn it and they're like, oh, run away, and they like freak out immediately. It's they start drifting. But then also I think it has
But
in the
the wall
correlation.
thing is more significant.
The wall thing's much more significant.
Where like
Yeah.
literally fish that are outs from the transducer to 30 feet out, anything outside of that, like we see it actually fairly consistently on these really pressured lakes, that fish coming in will stop at 30 feet and continue no further if the transducer's pointed at them. And it happens all the time. And like you can watch a school back up and literally stack up against the wall at 30 feet.
How do you know that they're stopping or observe it if you can't observe them without the sonar on, though? Like, I'm just like,
No, for sure. It's a theory because
Yeah.
like
it's always at 30 feet, it seems like.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like,
They're
what do you think happens
30
at
to
30
40.
feet?
I have no idea.
no clue. It's just something we've observed. There's
Well,
like I said, there's no way to necessarily prove that, but like for this one lake, for example, right? Like we were out there for a couple years trying to figure out what patterns or whatever to really get on them. And you would use the sonar and they would stop at that certain space, right? And we'd turn it off them and you'd walk over there and drill. And like there were still some fish around, you'd point it back over and you could watch them like meander away. So
Okay,
you
but
know
wait, they didn't move the first time when you were shining.
they stopped.
Okay, they stopped.
So you were like, okay, turn it away. And you're like, there's somewhere over there. And you go over there with your flasher and you're like, yeah, they're around. And we'll pull it out and be like, okay, well, we have to do it like this. But it also could be equated to, like, I think it's a thing where they equate that feeling then to they'll hear footsteps along with that or an auger along with that. And then that gets them to move. You know what I'm like? I think they start piecing things together because I've even seen it. Like me and Griff tested it on a place where we couldn't walk at them. We couldn't do anything. But I was like, dude, just out of curiosity, someone drove a machine or a truck over them and they didn't move at all. They opened their door, put 2 feet on the ground, and they swam away. And that's not necessarily with live sonar, right? But I was watching them at 80 feet at that point, but that was them correlating footsteps. So I'm saying, okay, they correlate footsteps. We're seeing them stop at 30. They're correlating something with a beam.
Well, that's all very specific. I think just in general, like the closer you are to that giant transducer that's ripping out that, I mean, like you would just think it'd be much more stronger if you're right here, opposed to here, opposed to here, opposed to here.
But I'm just saying this 30-foot thing is so consistent. We see it all the time.
It's
Like
very
it's not just we
consistent.
saw it once and we're like, well, that's interesting. Like it's all the time.
But
Well-
it's largely around the cities. Like when we got up north, it wasn't as much.
Yeah.
And they haven't seen it as much.
I definitely think there's something to do with that. Like if there's a basin of fish and they're getting pinged on a Saturday by 4 different groups with live scope and you go out there on Sunday, yeah, dude, they're freaking pinged and drilled on all day Saturday. And then you're the 7th group out there and you're like, you pointed at them. Ah! they did this yesterday. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like,
I don't know.
think,
You know, when you're ever in a situation like, let's say it's a clear water situation under 10 feet and you can see the fish really good and you start spooking them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like when you start legitimately spooking a fish, they're like in a different, they're just so friggin' gone and you cannot catch up with them. Like they are legitimately gone. So
True.
that's why when it's either drilling a hole or the sonar, it's confusing to me because it's like if they actually were spooked, then it just feels like it would be like they'd be freaking gone, not just like the wall or different theories like that. And I haven't experienced what you've experienced, Ryan. So I hope you aren't thinking.
No,
that
I'm just in my brain. I'm just thinking like, dude, I wish you could see the
Okay,
stuff we're
well,
seeing.
I'll have to come see it. I'll have to come see it. But the other thing I was gonna say is like, there's obviously a million different gradients between these two spectrums, but there's the crappies that sit and you just do whatever you want. Just go drill right on top of them and drop it right into their mouth, right? There's
Right.
that end of the spectrum. And then there's the end of the spectrum where you're watching those schools move around and you're just like, I've got no chance. I might as well just sit and wait and eventually they'll curl around and I'll have a chance at them. Right? You know, that's the two ends of the spectrum. So when there's such a big variance in the ends of the spectrum, and that's aside from them being spooked by sonar. So that's why I just don't know what to say about it, because like there's fish that just won't stop moving. It has nothing to do with the sonar. They're just zooming around. So then when you have trouble drilling on top of them or trouble getting them to come in, I feel like, well, they're also just zooming around and it's so hard to get on top of them. But I haven't experienced exactly what you've experienced. So I can't speak to it too much.
Ryan, Bart, have you guys fished in down mode much? I haven't, and I feel like that'd be a true testament, and especially not even crappies like bluegills, where like bluegills can be super finicky, you know,
We don't-
sometimes.
We don't
never-
use it in down view at all.
I've never tried it either, really.
Never.
Yep.
Use flasher.
But how would
Yep.
that help, Sam? Because then you wouldn't know if they were coming to get stopped.
Well, that's I'm just saying in general, if we're saying the theory that these fish really feel the beam of a live scope or a mega live, fishing in down mode would be the ultimate test to be like, okay, if I'm fishing in 10 feet of water, that's much closer than 30 feet away. If they're directly under me hitting that beam, like if we put more time into fishing in down mode, we'd probably get a better grasp on if they even care or not.
Maybe.
Right.
I'm just saying like,
I'm just saying we feel we feel
there's
so
something to
strongly
it.
about it that it's like I don't even want to mess with it because I think it will matter. So I think my catch rate will drop dramatically.
Well,
But if they've been pinged before or not, that's something totally to do with it. Because I bet if you're on a backwater and they've never been pinged and you're in 4 feet of
No,
water,
this is on lakes that are getting
Yeah,
mutilated.
you don't need this in a
Yeah.
backwater, buddy. It's 4 feet deep. You don't even need a flasher there. You just
I know, but
drop
I'm
it
just
down
saying,
2
like-
feet and jig, and you wait.
so Ryan,
But
that's only occurring on the most pressured of lakes. Like that's not going to you guys haven't witnessed the 30 to 40 foot wall on unpressured lakes?
No,
Okay.
pretty much
Not
never.
really, no. Pretty
Hmm.
much never.
Gotcha.
Maybe
That's why
towards the end of a day if we've been messing with them all day, but I think that's more that we've been beating them
Right.
up.
And there's no science behind this. It's just that we've correlated that to be like when these schools are being pressured and people are chasing them with forward facing sonar, that they're getting they're getting wary to that sonar noise or ping or whatever. And they have like a threshold that they're willing to come to. And then they stop at that consistent distance,
Yeah.
you know? Because if it was just like randomly like 10 feet here, 20 feet there, like I don't know that I would have thought that. But how many times do you have to see a school just stack up at 30 feet from the transducer you're pointing at them over and over and over again before you're like, maybe there's something to that, you know?
Well, I told the story this is how I told it on that other podcast on Sporting Journal Radio. But like, there's plenty of people here that have different stories or accounts of the fish turning away or just not coming in, not finishing that last 15 feet closer to the angler or something like that. And that's here on the same overlapping water bodies and close friends that I've fished with. And then I'm fishing out of the same hole as the live scope. So it's like, I know that they're not fishing the lakes you're talking about, but they're just as passionate about what they've observed. And then I'm fishing in with my live scope in my hole, and they're doing the technique where you use your live scope to sort of find them, but then you shut it off and just use your flasher from that point. Like, is that kind of what you guys do sometimes?
Well,
All the time.
yeah. I mean, we pretty much, if we're fishing, we're using a flasher.
Yeah.
We're using the forward to like maybe like sharpshoot a fish to guide someone to it, but they're fishing with a flasher all the time.
Yeah. That's got, I mean, it's also obviously way nicer to fish with a flasher in the hole than a live scope in the hole, and way lighter and easier to jump around with. The only thing I don't like about it is like once you're over there, now if that fish is 5 or 10 feet over, you're relying on somebody shining the flashlight from way far away. Whereas if you had the forward facing sonar with you, you could be seeing that and telling that on your own kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess our style of fishing is, I mean, that's how we do it. You know, like we're not someone is always running the forward facing sonar, guiding someone to wherever they need to go.
Yeah.
So it's not like if we were just two guys out fishing and constantly you got to be like, hey, where did they go? Where,
Yeah.
And that's
kind of
also like to be said with that too. Like there is, like you say, there's times where they're just racing around and you can tell they're in an area. There is times like where we see that and we're like, today ain't a live day. And you just pull it out and you just drill holes and hop
Right.
around with the Vexlar.
Yeah.
You just
Right,
make
right.
sure you're where they're intersecting.
Yeah.
So that type of deal too.
But you do get to observe a lot using it, which is cool, which is why like we get to see some of that stuff where you're like, man, I would have never thought that was a thing, I don't even thought about that. But you get to actually watch them.
You would have never thought there was two polar different options in the same basin. You know what I mean? Like you would have like tended to categorize fish as a whole or as a lake or whatever, not like, oh, and now these fish 2 hours later are behaving completely differently. Like you wouldn't think that was the case. Like the amount you can learn. Yeah. It's lame to even talk about because it's,
Yeah.
It is a lot.
The thing it's just made me learn the most is how much weather or pressure, like barometric pressure affect fish. Where like everything's great and dandy and all of a sudden like a cloud rolls in and they're all like, and we're done. And you're like, where'd they go? And the whole lake, there's just nothing. And you're like, what? It's just done like that?
Mhm.
Aaron, are you a weather geek or not really?
Hard no.
I'm just not observant enough or not. It's just not in my belief system or whatever. Like, yeah.
I wish I didn't observe it.
What about the
It'd be way
majors and
more
minors
fun.
for fish outside of muskie?
Yeah, for
You
muskie.
believe in that?
I don't believe in it as that much for muskies. So, I mean,
Really?
but I don't know.
I don't pay attention to major and minor much either. Do you guys? Bart
No.
or Pink?
No.
What about you? What about you, Stolski?
Oh, because I
The
Yeah,
trout
I
eating on the
know.
major?
no, because I have to be out there no matter what. So what's
Yeah.
it matter?
I think it really depends though, like if you have the time to dedicate, like I think we're more invested in the ice season because we dedicate so much time. Like if I was just a guy that was just going out on the weekend, I'm going no matter what anyway. Like what does it matter? Well, I'm like, get all wrapped up in whether I should go or not, or
Yeah,
my
but I
odds are
think
better if I just am out there.
there's those weekend guys. I mean, the muskie guys especially that plan the entire day around it. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, but then they self-fulfill it because they spend that period on their best spot. So
Sure.
it's like,
Yeah.
what I've observed with like crappies and walleyes is just seeing so many times where prime time is just so sharply better, but then other times where you can catch them in the middle of the night, and then other times where you catch them in the middle of the day. And am I just not doing the extra effort to connect the pressure? And that's the answer, Bart? Do I just need to like do a little bit more math and I'm not paying attention to that, or what?
I'm not
The
going to
numbers
say
have
that.
to come together.
No, I'm not saying I know anything like that. I'm just saying we have seen correlation with certain lakes where if it's stable at a certain, say, lower level, it's very good. Or like certain lakes, if it's dropping, it's very good. And then you go there and it's rising or flat and you like don't see fish.
How do you keep track of all that? Do you have like a spreadsheet? How do you even?
We have Matt Waldron.
Yeah, but I will say there is. I mean, like some of it is legit. Like I don't know about
I'm not.
Some of the nuanced things that we're talking about here are like, yeah, exactly.
This is specifically for targeting very large fish.
Yeah, but Adam, I could also like go to Aaron's point and just say, back in the day, we used to catch a majority of our big crappies in the middle of the night, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and you used to do the same thing. You know what I mean?
But our theory on that now is just I had a minnow down longer then, and one happened to swim through.
Potentially, but we used to get, I don't know. I feel like growing up, we used to do all our night ops, and that's where we catch.
How much time did you spend on a lake during the day compared to at night?
Exactly.
Back in the day, a lot more.
Maybe. I don't know. We would fish a lot during the day
after
too.
School
but,
and stuff. But
yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing with it. But like Aaron, you said bite window, and we'll wrap this up because we're well over 3 hours now. But like your bite window's up there. Like I'm sure you have a really good sunset bite and night bite and stuff like that. What's crazy about down here is we've caught, I think, Pink, you would agree, probably 80 to 90% of our biggest fish in the metro area are caught between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Normally,
Absolutely.
normally 12:30 to 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Dead middle of the day.
Are
Doesn't
you
matter,
still fishing in
clear,
the middle of
dirty
the
water,
night?
anything.
Now that
Yeah.
you're filming, are you still fishing in the middle of the night?
We go check out certain lakes.
Not
if
as
they're weed
often.
bites. Not as often anymore.
But it sounds like your shoot then is based around the middle of the day because you're shooting, so your bites are in the
Yeah.
middle of the day.
Well, our shoot is dark to dark.
Yeah.
And then we'll go out
Typically.
after dark if we think a night bite will take place.
I guess
But
I hear generalizations for a species like for pike or whatever. Let's say it's whatever it is, like high pressure, like nice bluebird skies or something is the best for pike or something. But then you go on a guide's website and you look through and there's every imaginable cloud type. And then, when you actually guide on a lake, because I guided up north for like 10 years and you're on the water every day, like Will's describing, he's got to be out there regardless. It's like you just see success under all possible conditions, and you see slow under all possible conditions. And I think that the one thing I always buy into is that if you go out there and you didn't get the morning bite, it's like, good, we didn't get the morning bite, it's still coming. Because one thing that seems common is that if you're on a good spot, a good time of year, you got confidence in what you're doing, the longer you don't catch them, the more likely you're going to eventually catch them. Like, it's going to happen. The window's going to open if you have relative confidence in the rest of your approach. But if you go out there and you absolutely destroy them in the morning bite, it's not going to be a good day bite. Like, it's just, they can't bite always. It's like, if it's good at prime time, it's probably not going to be good in the middle of the day. If you don't catch anything all day and you don't catch anything at prime time, then your chance to catch them in the middle of the night seems higher than ever, right? Like, because eventually it's going to catch up and you're going to have a good bite window, it seems like. But I've fished on the same body of water so many times, whether it's back with guiding or now like on my home lake fishing for walleye, where it's like, okay, the bite is at prime time like it should be, but then all of a sudden the bite's not at prime time and it could be the very next day. It's a day bite, but it for sure was not a day bite yesterday. And that's where, is it that the pressure's different or is it some other variable? I don't know. I mean, the number one thing that I think we can all agree on is that like more hours is more bites, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I think all this conversation just about all the different variables is something really good that I don't think people put into perspective, because I think there's a huge mantra out there that, like, forward facing sonar is the end all. You know what I mean? Once you have it, you'll mutilate the lake. Once you have it, you're going to catch everything. And it's like, no. Weather in general, or just day to day in general, there's so many different variables and different things. It's not like you cannot just go out and get forward facing sonar and smash. And I think a lot of people believe that. And that's just, no, it's not. It's no, there's a million and one still variables, especially with weather or just day to day.
Yeah,
For sure.
I
I thought you said you had two questions, Sobi. Did you have one? Did you have one more? Or are we going to wrap her up?
Yes. Favorite Manny moment over the years. Favorite Manny moment, Manny memory. You can interpret it how you'd like.
That's a very good question.
It's always like him chasing Jay or I, and it always feels, it's like back when you'd be playing a crazy game with your dad or an uncle or something, and they'd be chasing you around the house, and it would feel so real, like there's terror built in. Can you picture those memories?
Yeah.
And it's like Manny brought back so many of those memories so many times, where it literally feels like if he catches me or he catches Jay, he is going to hurt us. Like, it's just so real. And we've never actually had an altercation that like escalated, but I just remember multiple times where he's chasing us around the house or through the yard, and it just feels like this is terrifying. Like a 4-year-old running from their uncle or someone that they think it's so real. Yeah, he's imparted that fear in us many times. And yeah, it's definitely been a good time.
That's incredible. That's perfect.
That's great. Pink or Will, you guys got anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Aaron, do you have anything for us? I suppose I should ask that.
I don't know if we were supposed to talk about Sam's Red Lake video or not. I definitely didn't think we absolutely had to or not. But what I wanted to say is I watched your guys' Crappie Chronicles Red Lake video, and I think the overall theme that we've all kind of kept leaning into is we all have room for improvement here is that, like, you know, there's certain things that might not be obvious. Like, I'm going to just assume that talking about Sam's video is obvious. There's nothing really to talk about there. But like in terms of like your guys' video at Red Lake, every fish had the spoon like woofed into the back of the mouth. And it's like, that's one of these things or one of these topics that we can talk about for self-regulation, where why would that be the bait to keep using when it's like, it's hard to get the hook out and we know they're going to eat anything. And it's like fish after fish has it to the point where it's really hard to get that hook out. And I think that's a point where the fish are going to eat anything. They're going to eat it hard. And it's like, do we need the government to tell us that it's single barbless, or can we implement techniques that are cleaner and easier on our own? You know what I mean? I think that's an example of it. And where I've heard it with the live scope guys too, because I've asked quite a few musky live scope guys if they feel like it's exploitive. And the people I talk to all say no. They think fair chase is still there. The muskie can still say no. But what they do say is that they are experiencing a higher mortality rate or stressed fish rate, because when they're fishing with the live scope and some of those deeper fish, the fish are eating it deeper and harder than they would ever eat a bucktail that's on a horizontal line on a direct retrieve, because the muskie doesn't have the opportunity to get that bucktail too deep. And now all of a sudden you're on a free fall in a tube falling down to the fish, that the way the fish engulfs it reminds me of the crappie video with the fish engulfing the spoon, is they're getting the treble hooks all the way back in the mouth all the time. So my friends are telling me this, and it's like, you know, they're already thinking about it and trying to think about ways to orient the hooks differently, which is good to hear, because it's like, it's on us, you know, like, it's like we're getting better and better at catching them. So we need to be better and better at managing and handling those situations. Otherwise, the DNR's, okay, I guess it wasn't the DNR's idea to be looking specifically at live scope, but no matter what anyone says, they're thinking about it and have to keep evaluating it, because technology is going to keep getting better. If we don't think live scope is exploitive now, well, the next generation of forward-facing sonar will be, or 2 generations from now. We're certainly not that far from it being too much. So if we are adamant that we are responsible enough to handle this technology, well, we need to rapidly catch up and rapidly be responding with our angling techniques in a way that's showing that we are self-regulating what we're doing and practicing selective harvest and stuff. Because I know it's like been a common theme with both your guys' videos to release the big fish, but I would rather you release the fish that were lightly hooked and keep the fish that has the treble hook in its tongue and it's difficult to get out. You know what I mean? Because if that fish has all of a sudden has like let's just throw a number and say it's hooked deep. Now it's like a 25 or 30% mortality, but the one that's hooked in the lip is a 2% mortality. Well, never mind the talk of releasing the big ones. Let's be mindful that this one has a much higher chance of not making it anyways. Let's keep that one. And then if we don't need the treble hooks moving forward, we can potentially use a different lure, or, you know, like different analysis of our practices like that.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think that's fair. That's a fair assessment, I think, on all parts, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. That was good.
And I mean, more than anything, I know we can all do better, and I know I can do so much better with so much of this too. And especially when media is involved, we often take these liberties because we've got camera considerations. And even in that video that I said where the one fish that I stressed, it's because I was fumbling around to get the tripod and the ice scoop and different things. And it's like, we just got to make sure we're doing it better and that we're showing everyone else how to do it better, because how are we expecting them to learn and know unless we're demonstrating it as crisply as we can too?
Yeah,
Totally.
for sure. Totally agree. Well, with that, anybody have anything else or no? I think we did it.
I think we did it.
And we wrapped it up in less than an hour, or what's the time frame?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
45
perfect.
minutes. It was just
45
under an hour.
minutes. You crushed it, Aaron.
And thank you. Seriously, thank you for coming on here, and thank you for the extended time. It's great conversation, and I think it opens up the door for more conversation. Like you said, it's going to keep growing, and we're all going to keep getting better and better as anglers just from having these conversations, or open up the door to talk about different things that we can do better and improve on. So seriously, thank you for coming on the pod.
And we finally know why Aaron flaked out on Game of Inches. We got it out.
Yeah, we got it. We won't use it as clickbait. There we go. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to another episode of Pass the Barb. We'll see you on the next one.